Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Garrett Hake in New York as President Trump tries to turn his focus to November's elections, even as tensions he's created with his own party and the increasingly tenuous agreement with Iran threaten to stymie his midterm message. Today, President Trump delivering the keynote address at the Faith and Freedom Coalition conference as he looks to rally his base. The president focusing much of his midterm messaging today on Tuesday's victories by Democratic Socialist candidates here in New York, calling them communists and a threat to the country.
And as you saw with the communists elected in New York City recently, they're communists, they're not social democrats. They want to completely destroy the traditional American way of life. It's becoming a communist party. These are not social democrats. These are hardcore godless communists. They're godless communists. All communists are godless. They don't believe in God. This is the most serious threat to our country since its existence, in my opinion, 250 years ago. This is a major threat to our country.
And it comes as the president is stepping on his own agenda, complicating Republican lawmakers' efforts to highlight their work to lower the costs for voters. Earlier this week, Mr. Trump abruptly announced, to the shock and dismay of many in his party, that he was canceling an event to sign the bipartisan housing bill that passed with overwhelming support, demanding Republicans pass his overhauling voting access bill first. After a multi-hour meeting at the White House yesterday, Speaker Johnson sounded optimistic.
Very productive meeting. We're on exactly the same page. He wants to ensure that we stop any blockade in the House. Congress has work to do, and that's what we're going to do. The majority party should never be voting down rules. We got to be able to move forward on legislation and continue the America First agenda. And so we're happy to do that. It's another day at the office. This is the process in an era with small margins, but we'll get the job done.
But today, President Trump again expressing his frustration with Republicans standing in the way of the Save America Act.
All voters must show photo ID. Not so bad, huh? All voters must provide proof of citizenship. Is that so hard? And you're fighting the Democrats and a few Republicans who are doing a tremendous disservice to this country.
Meanwhile, tensions with Iran are once again escalating, which could further complicate the president's midterm message on the economy. The president confirming today that Iran fired 4 drones at a cargo ship in the Strait of Hormuz, saying the U.S. knocked down 3 of them and calling the attack a foolish violation of the ceasefire. Since striking the deal with Iran, President Trump has been touting the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, claiming it will bring down gas prices. And oil prices are almost back down to pre-war levels, coming down below $70 a barrel for the first time since the war began almost 4 months ago. But any disruption in the Strait or further violations of the ceasefire could threaten that progress. And moments ago in the Oval Office, President Trump reacting to Iran's attack on that cargo ship in the Strait yesterday.
You said that Iran violated the ceasefire. Will they face any consequences?
You'll find out.
Do you consider the ceasefire to still be in place?
I don't like the fact that they took a shot yesterday, actually 4, we knocked down 3, at a ship. Not an Allied ship, but a ship, a very expensive ship. And it was fine, but it took a little beating. They shouldn't be doing that, so you'll find out.
Joining me to break it all down now is NBC News senior White House correspondent Gabe Gutierrez, NBC News senior national security correspondent Courtney Cubie, and NBC News business and economy reporter Ali Canal. So, Gabe, what did you make of the president's message today? How much of what we heard today do you think will be a consistent part of the midterm message?
Well, Garrett, certainly what you just described, the president referring to Democrats as communists, that's something we expect to hear quite a bit of over the next couple of months, because we have been hearing it now for the last couple of days, ever since those primary victories by those Democratic candidates in New York that were backed by the New York mayor, Zohran Mamdani. Now, President Trump over the last several days has been escalating that message during his speech at the Faith and Freedom Coalition today. As you stated, that was a large part of his message, but also what we just heard in the Oval Office, this religious Freedom Commission, this draft report that is now being put forward, recommending basically replacing the idea of the separation of church and state. The president certainly playing to his base right here and trying to polarize the electorate. You have, him trying to play to his base while also denigrating Democrats and referring to them as godless communists, something that we heard several times during his speech today over at the Washington Hilton, Gary.
How much is he complicating the midterm play here with these constant infighting with the Republican Party? Do they need to put this sort of behind him, whether it's on Iran or on the SAVE Act, if he actually wants to focus on affordability?
Well, look, Garrett, you know as well as I do, he doesn't seem to care much about what congressional Republicans think. However, you're right. I mean, he lashed out at what he called grandstanders in the Republican Party overnight after meeting with House Speaker Mike Johnson yesterday. But at the same time, he canceled that signing ceremony yesterday, something that so many congressional Republicans have been looking forward to and looking to make it a part of their midterm message. And now the question is, what happens next in that in this rift between the Republican Party? It still remains unclear whether the president will go along with some of these congressional Republicans as their agenda at the moment seems to be stalled in Congress, with representatives like Anna Paulina Luna, some hardliners, wanting to bring all of this to a halt. And yet the president says that they're now grandstanding. This is still being ironed out in the Hill, obviously. Gary.
On the subject of grandstanding, do we have any update on when or even if the president will sign that housing bill?
The White House has not said whether he does indeed plan to sign it. Of course, now that it's supposedly been transmitted to the White House, it will become law in 10 days. We haven't gotten any indication that he plans to veto it at this point. So could be that he just does nothing and it becomes law automatically within 10 days. But again, it took away that nice, big, shiny press conference and signing ceremony that many congressional Republicans had been wanting ahead of this midterm campaign, Gary.
All right, Gabe Gutierrez on the North Lawn. Gabe, thank you. So, Courtney, I'll turn to you now. What more do we know about the situation in the Strait? Has the president described it accurately-ish?
We don't really know, actually. We do know, the facts that we know to be true are that at least one Iranian drone, we believe fired by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, one drone did hit a commercial ship. The U.S. military shot down at least one other drone. That's really all that we know about the situation beyond what President Trump has now been saying several times today and posting on social media. Now, at this point, we're not aware of any further firing beyond this one yesterday by the IRGC. But President Trump sort of upping the ante on it today when he posted that it was this violation of the ceasefire, as you just read on social media. So now the big question is, will there be any kind of a U.S. response to the violation of the ceasefire? Since the Memorandum of Understanding was signed on June 17th, we have not seen the back and forth in the Strait of Hormuz that we were seeing every single day there for weeks and weeks. So it's, again, we're really in sort of a wait-and-see mode to see whether these threats by the IRGC that they carried out, at least on this one occasion, whether they continue and whether it really does have an impact on the ceasefire going forward.
And Vice President Vance said that the U.S. and Iran had established some kind of communications line to avoid a potential military confrontation. Do you know anything about that? Was it made use of here?
We have no idea about it. We haven't gotten any information from the administration that number one, that it's actually that any kind of a framework even exists for what this is, or that it actually has been implemented in any way. Now, the military does have a history of something like this, and you'll recall something called the deconfliction line with Russia that existed for years over Syria. That worked. You had a U.S. colonel, generally with a Russian colonel, on the other end of a phone. It was literally a red phone, and they would pick it up if, in fact, one of them was going to be flying in an airspace that was breaching or near where the other military was operating, and it worked for years, where they were able to deconflict the airspace there. It's not clear if that's going to sort of be the maritime version of that, but we are asking those questions.
And let me ask you about the war within this war. We had Secretary Rubio today announcing a framework of an agreement between Israel and Lebanon. But if Hezbollah isn't part of that framework, what's it worth?
Yeah, and this has been the issue with these talks the entire time now. Every round of these talks is without Hezbollah involved in it. If there is some sort of an agreement for a ceasefire, whatever it is, it's generally not been implemented, at least not fully implemented on the ground in Lebanon. Now, this could be, if in fact Israel has agreed to something that includes them pulling their forces back closer to the border, is it possible that Hezbollah will look at that and will make some sort of a advancement towards some sort of a peace deal? It's possible, but so far these talks have not really yielded a whole lot on the ground. The one thing that is potentially possible is that this could be a step in the right direction if, in fact, we see some sort of a change to not only the Israeli forces where they are inside Lebanon, but to how they are operating there. I mean, Garrett, it's not getting a lot of attention, but, more than 4,000 people have died in Lebanon since March. It's a huge number,
Yeah.
about 40 Israeli soldiers as well, service members as well. So the fighting there has continued, despite the fact that we've all been very focused on Iran.
Right. I mean, it's a major theater within this war. Courtney Kuby, thank you for that reporting. I want to turn now to Ali Canal here with me. And so, Ali, what are we seeing from oil markets? Are they concerned? Are we seeing any kind of like wobble in the pricing based on what we've seen in the Strait?
Well, it seems like markets are betting that the worst case scenario has been avoided at this point. We saw U.S. crude oil fall below $70 for the first time since the war began. And remember, pre-war, crude was trading near $67 a barrel. So this is a pretty significant move here. And it comes as more ships are moving through the Strait of Hormuz. Those fears that we could be facing a major supply crunch, that's starting to ease. But analysts say that there are still risks ahead. There could be more attacks on some of these ships. There could be mines in the Strait. Obviously, as you know, the messaging has been really back and forth here. So investors are still watching this area and the developments in the Strait very closely.
And we've heard the president complaining about the lag between oil prices really plummeting and gas prices coming down much more slowly. What is that attributable to? And do you think we'll see gas prices continue to fall?
Yeah, I mean, gas prices have already fallen pretty significantly at this point. The national average is right now at around $3.90 a gallon, down more than 60 cents from its most recent peak. But gas prices do not fall as quickly as oil prices. And that's because refineries, distributors, those retail locations, so the actual gas stations, they're dealing with oil that was purchased at those higher levels. So this is likely going to take some weeks to go until consumers see a significant pullback. And that's, of course, assuming that oil prices stay at along these levels. And also, it's important to remember that we're in the summer months. Demand is usually higher this time of year. So that tends to cause gas prices to drift up just a little bit.
And while I have you, the president has also threatened a 100% tariff on countries that implement a digital services tax on the U.S. Can you just explain to folks what this even is and how it would work?
Yeah, remember tariffs? We haven't talked about tariffs in a little bit.
Still last year.
Yeah, right. This is really about U.S. and EU trade relations. So several European countries, they've considered or adopted these digital services taxes. So it's basically a tax on the revenue that large tech companies earn on the users in those specific countries. So this really affects those big companies like Google, Meta, Apple, Amazon. Now, for now, this is just a threat. But of course, if that goes through, then a lot of those imports from those countries, so those goods that we get from Europe, they could become more expensive for U.S. businesses and therefore consumers. But we'll see. I mean, this could just be a negotiating tool. But again, it's a good reminder that tariffs are still an impact here. We talk a lot about oil prices, even the AI build out, how that's been impacting inflation. But tariffs, they're still working in the background here.
All right, Ali, also still working here in the background on Friday afternoon. Thank you for being with us. And joining me now is South Dakota Republican Congressman Dusty Johnson. Congressman, thank you for being with us. I want to begin with that dust-up we were just discussing earlier in the week where the president, after he canceled this signing of that bipartisan housing affordability bill, that's a mouthful, over the Save America Act. Was that a mistake by the president to cancel that moment?
I wish the president would have signed the bill. It's an incredibly strong piece of legislation. It would bring down the price of housing in this country over time. Democrats like it. Republicans like it. It had a huge number of the president's key priorities. So I wish he would have taken a big victory lap. I think it would have been a nice moment for our country. But listen, he's a big boy. He doesn't take orders from me. I think he is going to see his way towards signing the bill. I hope he does, because it is absolutely the right policy for this country.
This is not the first time that the president has held up some piece of legislation because of his desire to get the Save America Act passed. Does somebody, be it Mike Johnson or somebody else, need to have sort of a more direct conversation with him about the feasibility of that project at this point?
I think lots of members of both the House and the Senate have tried to tell the president what the president already knows. I mean, the president is not a dumb guy. You can't get anything done in the House without 218 votes, and you can't get anything done in the Senate without 51 or 60 votes. And when it comes to getting rid of the filibuster, the president doesn't have 60 votes, and he doesn't even have 51 votes.
Right.
And so I know that can frustrate some of us, but the reality is that those numbers are not going to change just because I take to national news or I take to Twitter and complain about it. The changing hearts and minds of legislative colleagues takes some time.
What's your sense of how voters are looking at this and the idea that, is the president threatening the Republican agenda, popular stuff that you've been able to pass, by focusing on bills that cannot pass?
Well, let's keep in mind that most Americans are pretty busy living everyday life. They absolutely care about things like affordability, but they're not involved in the nuances of what does Congressman Dusty Johnson think they need to do today. Of course, I wish more people listened to me. But I think ultimately the midterms will turn not on news of the day here in June, but on actual facts on the ground and how people feel about them in October. And I think now is, listen, we should do the housing bill just because it's good policy. Mm-hmm. I would note, though, that it's also really good politics come October.
Yeah, I mean, to that end, the top issue for voters in poll after poll has been the cost of living. I mean, they care about it now in June. I think they'll probably still care about it in October, to your point. I mean, the president, when he canceled this signing, said the housing bill was, and this is a quote, of minor importance compared to lower interest rates. Even FISA pales in comparison to passing the Save America Act. I know your point is that we're still 4 months out, but I don't see any indication to think the president's going to suddenly want to not talk about this in, October, November.
Oh, of course, the president's going to want to talk about it. And by the way, I want to talk about election integrity, too. Mm-hmm. And I think this is like an 80-20, maybe 90-10 issue. So aside from being good policy,
parts of it are.
Well, no, sure. But when it comes to a photo ID to vote, that has worked really well in South Dakota for a lot of years. It doesn't disenfranchise people. You and I both know that people are using a photo ID on the regular to conduct business, from picking up football tickets at will call to getting on an airplane or buying a six-pack of beer. But the president is certainly allowed to care about more than one issue at once. And so I do think clearly he cares about FISA. That's the guardrails around the ability of our government to surveil suspected terrorists. And he can also care about affordability and care about election integrity.
I want to ask you about Iran now. The president signed that agreement with Iran last week. Today, he confirmed that there was an Iranian drone strike of some kind on cargo ships in the Strait of Hormuz. He called that a violation of the ceasefire. The U.S. has already lifted oil sanctions as part of this agreement. Are you concerned that we might have prematurely rewarded Iran given their ongoing behavior here?
One thing I have figured out in 8 years in Congress is that it is really easy to criticize foreign affairs. It's really hard to get them right. It's really hard. None of these decisions are easy decisions. We are not dealing with good faith actors when we're dealing with Iran. We're dealing with tyrannical Islamic zealots. And listen, we shouldn't trust these guys at all. But we also do need to get toward a ceasefire. Nobody wants a forever war. The only thing that these crazy guys understand is power. That doesn't mean that we should needlessly saber rattle, but it does mean that I think we don't want to rush into escalatory tactics, even if they break a ceasefire. There is a real hard needle to be thread here. I know the president is trying to do his best. If we're being honest, we are not in a great spot. But had we not engaged in this conflict, we would also not be in a great spot. It's not like the alternative of just letting Iran develop a nuclear weapon. I mean, they were getting ever closer to breakout time. Mm-hmm. The time away from one bomb was just a few weeks, and the breakout time from some pretty exquisite missile technology was only a few months. And so foreign affairs is very difficult. I think the president is doing his best.
There's nothing in this deal that changes their posture on missile technology, though. It's something I've asked the president about directly. I mean, to your point, though, I mean, you said you're not inclined to necessarily criticize him because this is so hard. But some people would say this is actually what Congress should be doing. Not only should be criticizing, but should have a bigger role in this deal. Should it be a formal treaty? I mean, what role do you think Congress should play in certifying or reviewing or having oversight over whatever agreement the president strikes moving forward?
Oh, I didn't say that people shouldn't criticize. I just said that it's easy to criticize. And
Fair.
I think when it comes to foreign affairs, people on both sides of the aisle and lots of folks in the middle, I think they just want to be thoughtful. I think they want to measure twice before they cut once with some, backbench criticism. And I have absolutely conveyed my thoughts on this conflict and the ceasefire to the administration. I am no shrinking violet. And honestly, almost none of my colleagues are. So Congress has not been passive here. We vote on war powers most every week that we're in session. And there is a robust back and forth between the executive and the legislative branches, as there should be. Now, you're right. There is nothing in this deal that slows down Iran's ability to go get a nuclear weapon. What did clearly slow it down was thousands of munitions dropped onto their critical infrastructure. And although now we're not in a great spot, I think we would have been in a worse spot had we not flown those sorties.
Congressman, we just have a little bit of time left. I want to ask you about your recent primary loss in the South Dakota governor's race. As someone who covered you for a long time, I was surprised to see that, although probably not as surprised as you were. You said that part of the reason you lost was, quote, "It's not a good time to be connected to Washington, D.C." Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, of course, thank you for picking at the scab that is my recent electoral loss. No, of course, it's fair game, and it's the kind of thing that as Americans we should be talking about. There are really, it's a little too simplistic to say that there are two camps in Washington, and it's not Democrats and Republicans. It is those on the extremes who seek political celebrity and those who are trying to find their way toward common ground. Common ground, a powerfully effective tool for American governance over the course of the last 250 years. But the primary electorate, that marketplace, doesn't much reward common ground finding these days. I'm not complaining about it. Every time I engaged in what was good governance, I understood that it wasn't always good politics. I felt duty bound to do it anyway, and that's okay. I have no doubt this great American experiment will continue and will be successful even if Dusty Johnson is not in office.
It'll be hard to imagine. Do you think your party can survive the kind of loyalty tests that make it harder to be a governing, get-it-done Republican?
Oh, people talk about this loyalty test. I don't know that it is anywhere near as effective day to day as people assume. I mean, when the president was talking about invading Greenland, there were plenty of contrary voices within his own party. When the president accepted the Qatari jet, there were plenty of contrary voices within his own party. The president wanted to do a $3,000 or $5,000 tariff dividend to Americans. That hasn't happened yet.
True.
The president wants the Save America Act done. It's not like the Senate is all gotten into lockstep on getting that done. So I don't think that there is a loyalty test. And I think focusing on just one party is a mistake. Here's the reality. We are in an ever-increasing time of populism and extremism. You look at the Democratic New York primaries on Tuesday. Man alive, it is a bad time to be a normal. And I don't think we're going to get good governance if we continue to turn toward the extreme poles of these parties. That should not be the American way.
Well, Congressman, you've teased our next block nicely when we will be talking about those races in New York. So I thank you for your production value to this show today. And I thank you for your service in Congress and for your time today.
Thanks much.
All right, take care. And coming up, the mounting death toll and urgent search for the missing in Venezuela, where the scale of the devastation from this week's earthquake disaster is starting to come into view. Plus, could the path to House control come down to a battleground district in New York's Hudson Valley? I'll speak to the Democrat working to flip the Republican-held swing seat. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. The death toll in Venezuela continues to climb after those massive back-to-back earthquakes. The government says at least 920 people are dead and more than 3,000 injured. And a new estimate from the U.S. Geological Survey predicts that the death toll could reach more than 10,000 people as the level of destruction comes into clearer view. In a race against time, rescue teams have been working around the clock to locate people trapped since the earthquake hit on Wednesday. Volunteers cheering as a survivor was pulled from the rubble of a collapsed building earlier today and then safely put onto a stretcher. In South Florida, which is home to a large Venezuelan American community, volunteers are mobilizing to collect humanitarian supplies. NBC's George Solis joins me now from Doral, Florida. And George, obviously in little Venezuela there in Doral. How are volunteers there responding to this disaster?
Garrett, they are coming out in droves. This community has showed up in a big way. As you mentioned, this area affectionately known as Dorozuela. You can see just a number of volunteers here that are packing all of this relief. And we were told by the Global Empowerment Mission, GEM, who is organizing all of this at the State Department, the U.S. State Department has greenlit all of this relief to get into Venezuela by this weekend. Now, of course, they wish it could have been a heck of a lot sooner, but with all the logistics, the airport being closed, this is the challenge that groups and nonprofits are facing that aren't the U.S. military, who is already on the ground mobilizing, offering air support, offering logistics, offering life-saving care, and obviously a lot more of the assessment of that bigger picture of damage that we know we're going to see in the days and weeks ahead. We've been talking to people, volunteers here, some who showed up on their day off, just wanted to be here because they were compelled to do so, about why it was so important to help today. Take a listen.
I have never, in all of the time that I've been here, seen a response as profound as this one. People coming from a couple of hours away to volunteer on their days off, hundreds of cars pulling up, filled to the brim with donated supplies. This is what it takes.
Yeah, Garrett, it is a Herculean effort, and when we've been talking to people with family in Venezuela, some who are still unaccounted for, I mean, again, when you look at the images of just the rampant destruction there, you have to wonder, a lot of these families holding on to hope that their loved ones will be found. We talked to one family whose their nephew was found in the rubble after hours. He's in recovery right now, but their 14-year-old niece is still missing. They are hoping that she is pulled out, but they said just based on the images, they're trying to be realistic. I mean, this is the reality that some families are facing right now, not just here in South Florida, where there is a large Venezuelan community, but really around the globe as we've seen this widespread humanitarian effort unfolding in real time, Garrett.
Yeah, the pictures are horrifying. It's just a terrible story. George Solis, thank you for your reporting. And up next, meet the candidate. My next guest is the Democrat who just won this week's primary to take on New York Republican Congressman Mike Lawler in one of November's most crucial House races. Stay with us on Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. As Democrats try to take back the House in November, one of the most closely watched midterm races will be in upstate New York. That's where Army combat veteran and former national security official Kate Conley will be facing off against incumbent Republican Congressman Mike Lawler after winning her primary earlier this week. And earlier this year, the Cook Political Report shifted the Hudson Valley district from lean Republican to straight toss-up, with Democrats eyeing the district as one of the most gettable for them come November. And joining me now is Kate Conley. Kate, thank you for being with us. I'll just start here. Your district is one of the prime pickup opportunities for Democrats in November. I don't have to tell you the stakes. How do you thread that needle of mobilizing, so the Democrats who voted for your progressive opponent in the primary, while also winning over enough of those voters who have supported Congressman Lawler in the past?
Garrett, thanks so much for having me. And at the end of the day, the message is simple. People here in New York 17 deserve better. Since Mike Lawler has been elected in November of 2022, life has only gotten harder for folks in terms of putting food on the table, keeping a roof over their heads, affording health care, or keeping the lights on. And that's impacting families across the political spectrum. It's not just a Democratic problem or Republican problem. It's a problem for working families in the Hudson Valley and across the country. And when we talk about what's happening on nationally, where you see this administration that is just absolutely adding to the crisis that is the affordability, crisis that folks are facing, people deserve better. People deserve a representative that's actually going to fight for them and to make their problems a priority, not their own political ambition. And when it comes to Mike Lawler, it has been very clear that his priority is himself.
Your primary victory as a more moderate candidate on Tuesday coincided with a number of wins by left-wing candidates and Democratic socialists down here in New York City. I want to play what one of those candidates, Brad Lander, said on this program yesterday.
The general election is where we go build unity and support each other. So I'll be out working for Kate Conley up in the Hudson Valley and Pat Ryan. You know, I knocked doors 2 years ago for Tom Suozzi and Laura Gillen out on Long Island. I joked I did it in, like, you know, mustache and glasses, so I wouldn't hurt them. So there's been plenty of times when I have supported more moderate candidates. I want the same in the other direction.
Do you welcome Brad Lander campaigning with you? And if so, would you make him wear the mustache and glasses?
Look, I welcome anyone here in this district that believes that people deserve representation that is going to fight for them, that's going to fight to lower costs, that's going to take on corruption in government, and is going to put people first. Because at the end of the day, that is not a Democratic issue or a Republican issue. What we're talking about is an American issue, and how do we help American working families? I think this is a big part of what we must do as not just a Democratic Party, but a country, is realize that the political dysfunction is what is tearing this country apart, and what is making it so hard for families who are working 2 jobs to just make ends meet. And we owe it to them to be better, to do better. And so I think the more we can tear down political silos and these different groups that, you know, we put ourselves in, the better as a nation we are going to be.
I'm hearing from you a pretty tight focus on some of these economic issues, but some of these other Democrats have called for things like abolishing ICE. Is that a position you support? Like, how would you square something like that with your own beliefs?
So when it comes to the government's responsibility to the American people, it is the safety and security of the American people at the top of that list. And when you look at things like immigration, look, you can support immigration and recognize that this nation has been successful and is going to need immigration to be successful going forward. And immigration's been a huge part of that. And also say, look, border security is national security. And we need to make sure that terror groups and drug cartels and criminals aren't coming into this country. But what we saw earlier this year, in January, when federal agents on American streets assaulted and killed American citizens, the very people they were sworn to serve and protect. That is wrong. And instead of calling for an investigation, instead of calling for transparency, this administration tried to cover it up and lie about the victims. That's not a Republican issue or a Democratic issue. That's an American issue. And I think going back to the things that unite us and focusing on those problems that are driving families to desperate points, it really does come down to, can they feed their families? Can they keep a roof over their heads? And I think for Democrats to be successful, we've got to focus on that and deliver.
I hear you loud and clear, but I do think there are other issues that are kind of in the zeitgeist, and one of those has been Israel. Congressman Josh Gottheimer said this about the anti-Israel views of some of those candidates we were talking about earlier. He said, the socialists have put their own personal hatred above our national security and our promises to our allies. It's a growing cancer, and we can't let it spread, and we cannot ignore it. What do you make of that statement? And does that kind of friction between these more socialist candidates and moderate candidates like yourself concern you?
Democratic voters here in New York 17 elected a proud West Point graduate and Army Special Operations combat veteran of 16 years and 6 tours. I am a proud American, and a responsibility to service to this country and to our community. That's what led me to go to West Point after 9/11. Mm-hmm. And I do believe that going back to, look, as a nation, there is far more that unites us than divides us. And when you talk about what resonates with people here in New York 17, service to country and community matters. And talking about what it's going to take to beat Lawler in November, we're going to keep building on what we did in the primary, which is bringing people together, where even if they don't share my party affiliation, we share values. And that's what we need to be focusing on.
The president has been hammering some of your ticket mates here in New York as communists. Mike Lawler's made it pretty clear he wants to use that same tactic, kind of lump all Democrats in together, lump you in with them. Do you think your background, your service, your West Point education inoculates you from some of those attacks?
I am a proud American, and America is the best democracy in the world. And I have committed my life to defending it, to serving it, and that is why I'm in this fight now. Because I'm watching this administration literally attack the founding values this country I love and was willing to die for was founded upon. And I refuse to allow that kind of corruption to be what drives the direction of America's future. And so Mike Lawler should be focusing on more on how to stand up to Trump and what is going on, and stop bending the knee and recognize that our country right now needs people who are going to fight for it.
I think if Mike Lawler were here right now, he'd say one of his big accomplishments in Congress was fighting for the state and local tax deduction, the SALT cap, that issue, which was a huge part of the president's first year. Is that an accomplishment of his that you would look to build on? Is there anything that he's done that you would tell voters you would like to continue upon should you be elected in November?
The SALT tax cap, which was expiring in its entirety in 2025, where Mike Lawler voted to make it permanent, is not a gift. He just made a permanent tax increase for middle-class New Yorkers right here in the Hudson Valley, too. And when you look back at the history of the SALT tax cap, we didn't have one for over 100 years as America. It was Trump in 2017 with his tax bill to punish New York, to punish California, that first implemented the SALT tax cap. And that was expiring in 2025. And instead of letting it expire, Mike Lawler made it permanent with his vote.
All right, Kate Conley, thank you for your time and for your service. Congrats on the win, and good luck out on the trail.
Thanks so much, Garrett. Appreciate you having me on.
And we have a bit of breaking news. The U.S. has struck Iran in response to the attack on that commercial vessel in the Strait yesterday we told you about earlier. Back with us now is NBC's Courtney Kuby and Gabe Gutierrez. So, Courtney, I'll start with you. What do we know about the specifics of this strike by the U.S.?
Yeah, so the U.S. military, they're calling this, as you said, a direct response to the Iranian drone strike on a commercial ship in the Strait of Hormuz yesterday. So the U.S. is saying this is basically a pretty proportional response to that strike. They hit things like Iranian missile and drone storage facilities, coastal radar sites. Why this may sound familiar to you, Garrett, is because this is very similar to the pattern that we were seeing several weeks ago before that memorandum of understanding was signed on June 17th in Versailles. Iran would fire, in many cases, it was these sorts of one-way attack drones. In some cases, it was these small, fast attack boats. And then in some cases, it was even surface-to-air missiles. But they were firing them at ships that were trying to transit through the Strait of Hormuz. The U.S. military was often responding, often shooting some of those down, even targeting some of those fast boats. And then after sort of a buildup of time of those Iranian more offensive actions, the U.S. military would carry out a number of strikes at the site of where those offensive projectiles, whatever they were launching from. So again, they would go after their drone storage facilities or perhaps their drone launching sites, missile storage facilities. Coastal radars was also a big one because, of course, that's how what they used to fire off drones and missiles, how they were able to direct them. So what's significant about this, though, Garrett, is not just the target's location. It's that this is the first time the U.S. military has struck inside Iran since about a week or so before that memorandum of understanding was signed on June 17th. So the real question now, President Trump has already said that the Iranian action yesterday with the one-way attack drone was a violation of the ceasefire. Now the U.S. military is responding. The real question now is, will we see this further escalate?
Right. I'm sort of fascinated by the idea that we know where enough of these other drone storage sites and radars are that we have. It's almost like we have this list of proportional response options when these things happen. But hold that thought for a minute. I want to bring Gabe into the conversation because, Gabe, the president kind of seemed to downplay the idea that this original Iranian strike would really affect the ceasefire, even as he called it a violation. But what does the word ceasefire even mean if they're shooting at us and we're shooting back at them?
Look, Garrett, we've been asking that question now for quite some time, and the president was asked that directly in the Oval Office just a short time ago during an unrelated event, and he didn't directly answer the question of whether he still considered the ceasefire to still be in place. He said, I didn't like the fact that Iran attacked that commercial ship yesterday, but he wouldn't specifically say whether he considered the ceasefire to still be in place. But the administration, they never say that they consider the ceasefire to be over. The president, other top administration officials have tried to make the argument that there's these small one-offs here and there that it might take a while for a ceasefire to take hold, or there might be small skirmishes that doesn't mean the entire deal is blown up. But what Courtney points out is exactly right. Will Iran counter? Will there be some sort of an escalation here, or whether this U.S. response will it be considered proportional and tensions de-escalate after that? It's too soon to tell at this point, Gary.
Gabe, forgive me for putting you on the spot here, and maybe Courtney knows the answer to this too, but have we heard anything from the Iranians about why they fired on this ship and other instances where they've fired on shipping or on U.S. personnel. It's, they've sort of laid it off on being related to Lebanon and Hezbollah. But what do we know about why Iran says they did this?
Well, Garrett, the Iranians have said they have not publicly acknowledged this particular incident, but they have said that ships traveling through the strait must go through a specific route through a coastal area as well. So they haven't really, again, specified why this particular ship was attacked, but they have put parameters on how some of how the ships are supposed to travel through the strait.
And Courtney, I'll come back to you for a second here. How many assets are sort of still available to the U.S. in the region? Has there been any drawdown since the Memorandum of Understanding? I mean, the blockade as it existed is over, but are all those ships and assets still in place in the region?
Bit, but they still have pretty much all the firepower available to them that was there when the ceasefire began. And keep in mind, during that time, both sides have actually been able to sort of refit. So the U.S. has been able to take the missiles that were fired off of ships and restock them. Many of the aircraft that were there, they've had time to rest. They've even brought in an additional carrier air wing, an additional carrier strike group. The Iranians have done the same thing. They've been trying to sort of reset should, in fact, major combat operations restart. Again, and I want to stress this, this appears to be right now a direct response to the Iranian drone strike from yesterday against the commercial ship. The military is describing this as somewhat proportional. At this point, this is not a resumption of major combat operations,
right.
But what we have to watch for is whether it does escalate into something even bigger.
And Gabe, on the political ramifications of this, I mean, how much more complicated does this make the talks around turning the MOU into something more concrete? There's nothing in there about drones, although there is obviously language about the strait being open for navigation. To the degree that the Vice President, Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner are still involved, how do you pick back up tomorrow or Monday and keep working with incidents like this popping back up?
Well, look, it all really comes down to what the Iranians do here and whether this escalates or not. We are within that 60-day window. We have seen the vice president, now back in the U.S. after those talks that he was overseas several days ago. But certainly this does, pose a challenge given that there's ongoing peace talks, and now there is this, back and forth. But as Courtney said, not a resumption of major combat operations. So it certainly could complicate those talks, but it really depends a lot on whether this escalates any further. There are so many thorny issues that are being discussed right now and during the 60-day window, as you know, Garrett, with regards to Iran's nuclear programs. As we understand, those technical talks are still underway and they will continue for quite some time. And, many experts anticipate the 60-day window to be extended because it likely will take longer in order to agree on some of the specifics of this. But the administration, they've sought to downplay these types of, one-off back and forth strikes before. Again, we'll have to wait and see how Iran responds to these latest U.S. strikes. There.
Well, and I'll just note the resumption of a pattern here with CENTCOM confirming the strikes after the markets have closed on a Friday. And we were talking about the idea of bringing down oil and gas prices earlier. This is the kind of thing that could roil those markets if they were open. So we'll see what the status of all this is come Monday morning when things resume. Courtney and Gabe, thank you for being on top of the breaking news for us. We'll come back to you if there's more. And still to come, Vice President Vance making headlines today for downplaying the Watergate scandal that forced President Nixon to resign from office and comparing Nixon to President Trump. Keep it here on Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Vice President Vance has been raising some eyebrows for downplaying Watergate, the only scandal that ever actually led to the resignation of a U.S. president. This was at an event at the Richard Nixon Presidential Library. The vice president said yesterday that Watergate would not lead the news for more than a day in today's news environment, and he drew parallels between President Trump and President Nixon.
I'm actually fascinated by Nixon as a character in history. I think that his historical legacy is enjoying a bit of a renaissance, but I think deservedly so. As I joked with Robert backstage, if Watergate happened tomorrow, it would be like a 12-hour news story. Like, the idea that it would have taken down a presidency is crazy. And by the way, if you look at the story of how the deep state took down Richard Nixon, it's not all that different from what the same groups of people, the same institutions tried to do to Donald Trump in the first Trump administration. There is a parallel.
With me now is Steve Israel, former Democratic congressman from New York, and now the director of the Cornell University Institute of Politics and Global Affairs, and Caroline Downey, staff writer for the National Review. So, Caroline, I'll start with you. Just to the basics. Did the vice president misspeak here, or is this sort of accepted Trump world view on all of this historically?
Yeah, well, this thinking is getting some credence on some corners of the online right, this Nixon mania, if you will. And the idea is that he was basically the target of a deep state op. And Vance is not completely wrong in the sense that Deep Throat, the source behind the big expose, was a high up at the FBI.
Yeah.
But I don't like this thinking of elevating Nixon above some really successful Republicans like Reagan, for example. The idea that Nixon had a more durable, long-lasting coalition than Reagan, it's just outright wrong. I mean, this guy won 48 states in 1984, right. Groundbreaking landslide. He brought in at least 10 GOP senators, I think more. The former congressman will have to fact check me on that. But yeah, there's an appetite for this Nixon thing on some parts of the right. But ultimately, what it comes down to is, look, political corruption is far too commonplace among presidents, period. Today, yes, the Russia hoax, that turned out to be, it did make Watergate look a bit like a Tea Party. So did the cover-up of Biden's frailty and his decline. But that doesn't mean Watergate was good.
Well, to that end, I mean, is this something where the White House wants Donald Trump and Richard Nixon mentioned in the same sentence a lot?
I think they appreciate that comparison now. Yeah, I'm not going to lie, there's a romanticism about Richard Nixon now with Trump. We also see this comparison with him and Andrew Jackson, right? I think they like to put themselves in the same league. But notice how Reagan is not. They don't necessarily like to be compared
to Reagan. Yeah, it is interesting that Reagan has kind of slipped from the conservative zeitgeist in that way. So, I mean, Congressman, I imagine as a Democrat, you probably welcome these comparisons a little bit more. But what do you think about the central point that Vance made, that, like, our political sort of scandal meter is so different now? I mean, put on your alternative, as a bookstore owner, put on your alternative history or historical fiction hat. I mean, if this were happening right now, do you think he's right about how this would play?
I'm not going to let this guy whitewash history. Watergate was about crimes. It was about firing career prosecutors trying to do their jobs and uphold the Constitution. It was about enemies lists. It was about misleading and lying to Congress and lying under oath. That's what Watergate was about. No surprise to me that Vice President Vance has an affinity for that. But I think this reflects a worldview, and that's what I think is especially troubling. And that worldview is, it's not about whether it was right or wrong. It's not about whether it was legal or illegal, moral or immoral. It's about, can you get away with it? Right. And that's what I think is most troubling.
I will say, covering that White House, there are officials there who I've talked to who talk about news happening at the speed of Trump. That, like, any story that's bad today will definitely be replaced tomorrow by something else, good or bad. They fully accept that that's built in. To that end, Kelly, I want to play you another bite from Vice President Vance at the same speech that is also worthy of some conversation. Let's listen.
Well, again, I'm a millennial, and so I believe that's the wisdom of the great Christian theologian P. Diddy, who, as we found out over the last couple of years, is very much not a Christian or a theologian. But see, I'm going to get in trouble for all kinds of things. That'll be one of them. That will be an attack ad at some point in the future.
Yeah, perhaps it might. I mean, we've heard Marco Rubio name-dropping some 90s rappers. We now see this from Vice President Vance. Does that illustrate to you any of his vulnerabilities ahead of 2028? I
mean, not necessarily. Like, I don't think he's glamorizing P. Diddy from what I understood him to say. I do think he is online. Like, the thing about J.D. Vance to understand is that, and he does tend to attract a lot of young people to the coalition for this reason. He's pretty online. He's pretty in tune with that audience. And so, and I think he's been on podcasters like Theo Vaughn. I think he's pretty comfortable with these venues and with, name dropping these kinds of references that maybe might get a laugh. But I don't think it's like a real liability, but we'll have to see. I mean, I would like to see a rigorous primary process, when that all shakes up. And I hope, Rubio is also a very competitive player as well. I think we need a real competition.
I think you're going to get one. I mean, what do you think, Steve? The idea of Rubio, Vance, primary seems far-fetched, but perhaps not. I mean, as a Democrat, who would you rather see at the top of the ticket?
Let's not ever use the phrase far-fetched in today's politics.
Fair point.
Right?
Okay, exactly.
Everything is. We just got P. Diddy and Richard Nixon in the same segment. So
yeah, if we hit one
bizarre.
more, I think they get free tacos or something.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, though, I don't know whether this is intentional or not, but I think the White House kind of enjoys the fact that we're talking about P. Diddy and not tariffs and not gas prices and not the economic anxieties of the American people. What Democrats need to do is ignore this stuff and focus on the economy and affordability in order to win the midterm elections.
I mean, to that end, we had an interesting example of this week with that housing bill signing that got canceled. I mean, here you've got the president talking about all these other issues. There was a big, legitimate bipartisan achievement on Capitol Hill, and the president walked away from that moment. Was that a mistake to sort of leave that on the table for the president?
Well, there's no doubt that affordability is the mantra that Democrats have really capitalized on, and quite well, I will say. They made it a very compelling talking point. It's obviously, it hits at a sensitivity for a lot of Americans, and housing is chief among them. I do think there's a lot of debunking that Republicans need to do when it comes to the housing issue. You know, like, why is it that home prices have appreciated so much? How did government play into that? Why is that Gen Z, my generation, can't afford a home right now? There's a lot of factors that go into that.
We're not talking about that at all.
We're not. Well, to his credit, Trump has reduced regulation. He's tried to get housing construction ramped up. That's the key to affordability. Which I don't think Democrats are very good at articulating is affordability. The equation is productivity plus innovation. It is not rent control, a la Mamdani in New York City. That's a Band-Aid. That's temporary. My generation will not be very happy at the end of the day if that is his only solution.
I'm glad you brought in Mamdani, because I wanted to talk a little bit before we run out of time about the changes that are going on in the Democratic Party. I mean, we did see this very interesting flex from the left this week here in New York, but we also saw Kate Conley win in that Hudson Valley seat. It's fascinating to see the directions simultaneously the Democratic Party is going. What do you think the leadership of the Democratic Party is going to look like in this next Congress? I mean, I see both Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries struggling to get their arms around what their coalition even is right now.
Yeah, and that's just a function of how Congress is operating. The Republicans have the same issues. Look, the DSA, Democratic Socialists, are having a moment, but they've not yet established a critical mass, number one. Number two, Democrats have any hope of taking the majority, and I believe they will. I believe Hakeem Jeffries is going to be Speaker of the House. They can't worry about where elections being won in Brooklyn, New York. They've got to focus on Brooklyn, Iowa.
Yeah.
40 competitive districts. If the Democrats flip enough of them, they have the majority. And there they should be talking about home ownership. I think that's going to be the hidden issue in this midterm election.
I'll give you a very quick last word here. Are they going to be hearing about the candidates of Brooklyn, New York in Iowa? I mean, is that the Republican House playbook to say, like, look, do you want these guys in charge?
I wanted to believe what you said, but the problem is that the Democratic establishmentarians, they're also made in New York. So it's kind of a center of gravity for the establishment of the Democratic Party as well as these radical upstarts. So I think it has broader implications than we think, and I just hope that it doesn't get scaled up, because I don't think it's going to be competitive nationally in swing states, in Pennsylvania. There's just no way.
Right. I mean, your top party leaders are New Yorkers. You know, the next couple folks down are also coastal. I mean, it's an interesting balance for the Democrats.
And they know that the growth potential for Democrats is in Iowa
That's right.
and California.
I'm obsessed with Iowa and the House races there, but we will have to do that in our next hour, which we're now out of time for today. Thank you both for coming in on a Friday. I so appreciate it. And we'll be back Monday with more Meet the Press Now. And if it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press on your local NBC News station. We'll have exclusive interviews with Senators Chris Murphy and Roger Marshall, plus Maggie Haberman and Jonathan Swan on their fantastic new book. For now, there is more ahead on NBC News Now.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.
Safe haven? The Supreme Court hands President Trump a huge deportation victory.
Temporary means temporary.
But, as a key Republican says, that's an expensive mistake. Will Americans agree? Homeland Security Secretary Markwayne Mullin is next, and then Ohio Governor Mike DeWine responds. Plus, split ends. Trump gears up for a historic fourth featuring himself as he feuds with his own party. But as Democrats confront their own split, are they handing Republicans an opportunity?
Communism, it destroys everything.
Republican Senator Tom Tillis and then Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock join me ahead. And on the brink, as the U.S. and Iran exchange fire, I'll talk to veterans turned political leaders about what they might do differently. Governor Wes Moore, Congressman Don Bacon, and author Rai Barkott are coming up. Jake Tapper in Washington, D.C., where the State of our Union is watching for fireworks. We're looking to the Middle East this morning as an exchange of strikes between the U.S. and Iran threatens negotiations between the two countries, particularly over the Strait of Hormuz, which Iran is signaling it still wants to control. This does not look much like a ceasefire in the sense that the fire has not ceased. We'll have more on that this hour, but let's begin with the bombshell ruling from the U.S. Supreme Court this week, which gives the Trump administration the authority to end TPS, or temporary protected status, for immigrants living here who fled armed conflict in their home countries and are here legally, or at least they were. The ruling has sent more than 350,000 immigrants from Haiti and Syria into something of a state of panic as they prepare for possible deportations back to Haiti and Syria, amid questions about how and when the Department of Homeland Security will act. Joining us now is the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, Markwayne Mullin, who joins us from his home in Oklahoma. Thanks so much for joining us, Mr. Secretary. So more than 350,000 people from Haiti and Syria who have lived and worked legally in this country under TPS. Will you be deporting all of them? Will they be all deported back to their home countries, Haiti and Syria? And when will these deportations start? Will it be immediately?
Well, Jake, first of all, temporary protective status was never intended to be permanent. And there's a lot of people that came over here 15, 20 years ago underneath TPS that's already changed their status. The whole time these individuals have been here underneath the temporary protective status, they could have applied for a visa. They could have applied for a LPR. They could have applied for different directions, but the status itself can be ended in its name itself by saying temporary. So these individuals have a couple of choices. They can try to apply for a permanent residence here. They can apply for a temporary visa if they choose to, or they can choose to go back. And if they want to go back, we'll help them with that. If I'm talking directly to the individuals with the temporary protective status, either try to fill out the paperwork and be here underneath a permanent status, or we'll help you get back to your country. We'll actually give you a plane ticket plus roughly $2,100 to help you reestablish when you get there. But temporary protective status, according to the courts and in its name itself, is not permanent status.
So if the 350,000 temporary protective status holders right now start applying for permanent status, start applying for visas, will they not be deported? Is that a way for them to stay in the U.S. legally?
Well, it depends on if they qualify or not. Underneath some visas, when you overstay your visa, when you have to go back to the country you came from. Underneath TPS, while it is still in order, you're able to apply for different status. Now, that doesn't mean that it's going to be accepted. There's a lot of things that take into consideration. First of all, have you been here and been charged with a felony, or do you have a criminal background? Do you have pending charges against you? Those won't be accepted. If you've been here and you've been living off the taxpayer dollars, meaning that you're part of social programs, those won't be accepted either. If you've been here and you've had a full-time paying job, underneath some circumstances, those would apply, but you have to go through the regular steps that every other immigrant that wants to come to the country legally has to go through. So I can't say that everybody's going to be accepted, but you are eligible to apply. Nothing prevents you from applying, filling out the application, but nothing's prevented them since they've been here underneath TPS either.
So obviously you're correct that the T in TPS stands for temporary. The Trump administration's argument
That's right.
Is that this was only supposed to last 18 months. My understanding of how the process works is the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security has the discretion to extend it if the U.S. State Department says that the countries that these people are from are still considered unsafe, which is why they were afforded TPS status to begin with. Is it the position of the Trump administration that Haiti is a safe country to send these people to?
Well, we take a lot of things in consideration. Secretary Rubio, the president, and I have had multiple conversations about this. Obviously, the qualification isn't quite just that simple. And keep in mind, a lot of these individuals haven't been here 18 months. They've been here 18 years. Some of them have been here 20 years, 30 years. They've had plenty of time to reestablish their status inside the United States. They just chose not to. Then there's some that has been here underneath the Biden administration that took advantage of an open border. And those individuals didn't really come over here because they needed a protective status. They came over here because they were taking advantage of a weak leadership. So what we want, and the president has made this very clear, those that are coming to this country legally, they need to be able to contribute to the United States, not be a burden on the taxpayers. And so we are continuing looking at our temporary protective status. Those individuals that do need assistance because of the country they're in, we're always looking at them. There isn't a more generous country in the world than the United States, but we don't want people to take advantage of it.
Right, but do you maintain that it is safe in Haiti to send these people back?
Well, I think, like I said, Jake, this is a decision that's being made from the State Department, from myself and the president, and there's a lot of things that we look at when we take this in consideration. It's not just one factor that plays into this.
The reason I ask is because I heard Stephen Miller, who's driving a lot of this, say that Haiti is safe for Haitians. And I just looked at the State Department's website, and they have a level 4 do not travel advisory for Haiti just from a few months ago, from April, and it says, quote, violent crime is rampant. The expansion of gang, organized crime, and terrorist activity has led to widespread violence. Crimes involving firearms are common. Crimes include robbery, carjacking, sexual assault, and kidnappings for ransom. That doesn't sound safe to me.
Well, that do not travel is not for Haitians. That's do not travel for the United States, because they are kidnapping or trying to kidnap individuals from the United States because they feel like their family has the money to pay the ransom. We have do not travel in places in Mexico, or advisory warnings. In fact, if you go through our website in the State Department, you'll see there's advisories to a lot of places that are vacation destinations that we have advisories on because of the real risk to Americans. That doesn't mean it's a risk to the individuals that live there. So that advisory is to American citizens traveling to Haiti, not Haitians going back home.
I understand that, but based on everything I've read, including the UN and Human Rights Watch, it doesn't sound safe for Haitians. More than 8,100 killings documented last year. Those weren't Americans. Haiti is among the top 5 countries with the highest rates of rape and sexual abuse, with more than 1,200 cases of sexual violence last year. That's not Americans. 1.4 million people have been displaced. Those aren't Americans.
Is there a question in that?
Well, I'm just
Jake,
saying,
I'm sorry.
Let me ask you. You said you're going to give them a plane ticket if they want to get out and go back to Haiti. How logistically would it happen? Because the FAA prohibits commercial flights to Port-au-Prince because of the gunfire from terrorists and gangs. Civil aviation, by the way, is also prohibited in Syria.
So we have several options for deporting individuals, because we have deportation flights where we can get into areas where maybe commercial travel can't go to. So we'd simply book them on a flight. We expect to have pretty full flights going back to Haiti and going back to some of these countries where TPS has been eliminated. So we'll provide the travel for them. And like I said, we'll give them $2,100 roughly to go back home. We want the individuals to be repatriated to their country. Maybe they can go back there and help restore their country. Syria is a prime example. Syria has come a long ways in just a few years underneath their new leadership that we have. We truly expect that Syria can be a great country again, but it takes it takes the people of Syria to build their country back. The same thing in Haiti. It takes the people of Haiti to win their country back. If we really want those countries to succeed, then they need the best of the best to be back in their country living there, and we're going to assist them in that.
Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, Markwayne Mullin, thanks for joining us today, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jake.
Ohio's Republican governor says the decision to deport Haitian immigrants and remove their TPS status is a mistake. And Ohio Governor Mike DeWine will join us to respond next. And then, could Iran talks be over almost before they began? And what would that do to gas prices at your pump? Senator Tom Tillis of North Carolina coming up. We just heard Homeland Security Secretary Markwayne Mullin talking about deporting immigrants here in the U.S. on temporary protected status, Haitians and Syrians. My next guest is the Republican governor of Ohio, home to thousands of Haitian immigrants. He says what the Trump administration is doing with the Haitian community is a mistake. Joining us now, Ohio Republican Governor Mike DeWine. Governor, you just heard Secretary Mullin defend the decision. You say it's a mistake. What's your take?
Well, I think it's a mistake for a number of reasons. First of all, to go back to what you were just discussing, you cannot fly into Port-au-Prince today. U.S. carriers are prohibited from going in there. They've extended that ban. Federal officials in the United States have extended that ban into September now, and it's been there for a long time. The reason they can't go in there is because these gang leaders who control a good part of Haiti today shoot at the planes when they come in. So that's certainly one thing. You've pointed out, advisories, heavy advisories. U.S. citizens do not go into Haiti. It's a very, very dangerous place. Just this last week, several more school children were killed just because gangs were shooting back and forth. The gangs control a significant part of Haiti, so it is clearly not safe. Anybody who has followed Haiti over a long, extended period of time knows that it's worse than it has, frankly, ever been, and certainly in recent memory. But the other point is, it is not in the United States' interest, certainly not in Ohio's interest, to have people who are working every single day, who are supporting a family, who are buying houses, fixing up old houses, starting businesses, and then put deep roots in this country and really are contributing, and yank them out. I mean, look at what the mayor of Springfield says. Mayor says that is a huge, huge mistake. They're contributing. Rob Rue says they're contributing greatly. Mistake to do that. I would cite also the two Ohio congressmen who have probably the most Haitians, the Republicans who have the most Haitians in their district, voted in favor of the extension of TPS. So what I would hope that the Trump administration would do is reconsider this. Look at how it's going to impact states like Ohio. In Ohio, the Haitians are working primarily in manufacturing. They're also working in the food area. But if you look at where they're working across the country, probably the most important area they're working is in healthcare. It's Haitians who many times are taking care of your mom or your dad who has Alzheimer's, taking care of family members who might be in a nursing home. And to say we're going to pull all of those out, it's just not in our own self-interest.
Yeah, we have the retirement home that my mom's in has a lot of Haitian Americans working there. And Republican Congressman Mike Lawler has talked about that, what a drain it would be on the healthcare industry in New York. Your fellow governor, Kathy Hochul of New York, she's vowed to fight the decision. Are you going to fight it?
Look, I accept the Supreme Court's decision. In this country, they're the final say of what the law is. But I think that it's important that we separate the legal decision that was made by the Supreme Court with the issue of public policy. And we're now to the point of we have to look again at the public policy. And again, I would hope the Trump administration would reconsider what they are doing. Mm-hmm. This is an administration that is focused a lot on jobs. These are jobs that are being filled by Haitians who are filling jobs that would not be filled any other way.
Yeah.
The big picture in Ohio, if I can just finish, the big picture in Ohio is we are red hot. We are bringing companies in here. We're creating a lot of jobs. We have to do two things, and we've really focused on it. Early childhood education, Dolly Parton Imagination Library, my wife Fran is working on, science of reading, career tech, more scholarships for college. We have to make sure our population is people who were born here, all of them have the ability to live up to their full potential. But if you look at where our growth is, if we're going to complete that, we have to have immigrants here. 75% of the growth in the last decade of the population of the state of Ohio, and we are now moving up, which is a great thing. 75% of that comes from immigrants. Mm-hmm. If you look at the state, 1/5 of our doctors come from some other country. 12% of our STEM workers come from some other country. I applaud the administration I seriously do. They have done a tremendous job on the southern border. It had to be done. They did a great job. President Trump gets a lot of credit for that. I think, though, that we now need to look at what's in the best interest of the United States besides closing that southern border,
right?
And how do immigrants fit into that? We are a nation of immigrants. Ohio is a state that was built by immigrants.
All right, Ohio Governor Mike DeWine, thank you so much, sir. Really appreciate your time today. Two potential 2028 contenders are out with books about faith. I'm going to talk to one of them about how faith could shape the next presidential election. That's next. As Democratic socialists win primary elections coast to coast, President Trump sees an opportunity for the Republican Party. But how many Democratic officials agree with his take? Joining us now, Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock of the state of Georgia. He's the author of a brand new book, The Crooked Places Made Straight, Reflections on the Moral Meaning of America. Here it is right now. And I do have a question or two about this, but let me just ask you about the news, because shockwaves jolted your party last week when three of Mayor Mamdani's candidates, supported by the Democratic Socialists of America, swept New York's primary, defeating two incumbent Democratic members of Congress. Mamdani said those victories prove that the DSA has a durable movement. Among the positions that these candidates have advocated for are ending all support for Israel, ending prisons, ending police, no borders. Now, you've worked hard to be a progressive who can represent all of Georgia, all of a purple state. Are you worried at all about the impact that these positions of some DSA members could have on the Democratic Party's ability to win a majority in November?
Jake, I have to tell you that if I were a Republican this morning, I would be deeply worried because they're having an argument about who is the most loyal to Donald Trump. We are a big tent party focused on the ordinary concerns of everyday Americans. And we have robust and sometimes rambunctious arguments about what to do, but there's no question that grocery prices are unaffordable, health care is unaffordable. Donald Trump said he was going to lower our prices on day one. And here we are 2 years into his presidency, and every time someone asks him about the price of groceries, the price of gas that he's raised with this illegal war of choice, when asked about housing, which he could have done something about last week, chose not to do so, he and his administration quickly talk about Joe Biden. Well, I think the voters are not interested in hearing about Joe Biden. They elected Donald Trump. 2 years into his presidency, he's done nothing. And so I think as young people especially deal with this affordability crisis, as they deal with the fact that the average age for a first-time home buyer right now is age 40, and most Americans don't have $400 for emergency relief, they want to know who's focused on them. And their response to that differs. We've got all kinds of candidates across the ideological spectrum who are getting elected. And I think the thing they have in common is that they're finding ways to center the concerns of ordinary people.
So I hear what you're saying. There is an interesting dynamic playing out in the Democratic Party, however, when it comes to the DSA and black voters. On the one hand, Congresswoman-elect, presumably Chevalier, narrowly won black voters in New York, like 48% to 46%. On the other hand, a lot of these positions of the DSA advocate for things that black voters in general don't support, like no borders, no police, no prisons. And then I want you to take a look at what happened on election night on Tuesday, according to this viral video reported on by New York Magazine, among others. Take a listen, and we'll talk on the other end of it. So that's a bar full of largely white DSA activists chanting "You're next" as they watch an interview on the TV in this bar with Hakeem Jeffries, the potential first ever black Speaker of the House. What's your take on that?
You know, as I said, we have robust and rambunctious arguments about the direction of our party, but the focus is on the concerns of ordinary people. Look, I don't believe in abolishing the police. You can't have security without police. You don't have a country without borders. But this debate will go on. Black Americans are not a monolith. They will respond as they are hearing candidates center their concerns. I think part of the problem with politics, quite frankly, in our country is that we've made the politics about the politicians. Which candidate is in, who's out, who's up, who's down, what's going to happen to this politician come November. I'm worried about what's going to happen to ordinary people who can't afford their lives right now. And there's a way in which both parties have not adequately responded to this deepening American crisis. We've seen the concentration of wealth in our country increasingly at the very, very top, especially since Citizens United and the passing of the one big ugly bill, which I call Robin Hood in reverse, socialism for the rich, the largest transfer of wealth from the bottom to the top. I think young people are seeing that. They are deeply frustrated. And there's a wide range of their responses. But we have to center the people. And come November, the people are going to hold Donald Trump and his henchmen accountable. We're going to put some guardrails on this president by flipping the House and the Senate.
Let's talk about your book, The Crooked Places Made Straight: Reflections on the Moral Meaning of America. I'm struck by the fact that two potential 2028 presidential candidates on either side of the aisle have written new books about faith, you and obviously Vice President Vance. His is about his conversion to Catholicism. You have this passage in your book that struck me where you say, quote, "It might seem odd that as a pastor, I'm not automatically heartened when I hear that Christians are at the negotiating table. That's because I am, too, a student of history. And I know that in some of this country's crucial moments, Christians have stood on the wrong side of justice." In that light, what do you make of the vice president talking about his faith?
Well, I'm glad he's talking about his faith. I take his Christian confession at his word. I don't question that. But, I think it's my duty as a brother to hold him accountable based on those claims. Even as the vice president talks about his conversion, he's a new Catholic. I was struck by the fact that he's wasted no time telling the Pope how to be the Pope. The Pope, in the light of this illegal war of choice in Iran, began to talk about peace. And I couldn't, but chuckle a bit to hear this new convert say that the Pope needs to be careful when he's talking about theology, that I guess he ought to stay in his lane. And so I just worry that sometimes the religion becomes one more tool in the ideological toolbox. My faith is not a weapon. It is a bridge. I was struck last summer by the fact that right before they passed the so-called one big beautiful bill, I call it an ugly bill, right before they cut $1 trillion out of Medicaid, calling it waste, fraud, and abuse, even as they kick 15 million people off of their health care, right before taking food out of the mouths of children with these draconian cuts on SNAP, which disproportionately, by the way, impacted red rural districts, the Speaker of the House and other legislators gathered together in a very ostensible and public way in front of the press, joined hands and said a long prayer. And then after they prayed, they cut $1 trillion out of Medicaid. They cut SNAP and kicked people off of their health care. And so I just want to know, what were they praying about? And that's a discussion and a conversation that I am trying to encourage, even as I've written this book, The Crooked Places Made Straight.
Senator and Reverend Raphael Warnock, Democrat of Georgia, thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it, sir.
Keep the faith.
President Trump is on the outs within his own party. Is the so-called YOLO caucus ready to block his pick for Attorney General? Senator Tom Tillis of North Carolina joins me next. President Trump renewed his threat against Iran overnight, warning that Iran could, quote, no longer exist if they don't stop violating the ceasefire memorandum of understanding as both sides exchanged fire this weekend. Joining us now to discuss, among other matters, North Carolina Senator Tom Tillis, a Republican. Senator, thanks for joining us. So Iran and the U.S. are trading strikes this weekend after Iran attacked 2 ships in the Strait of Hormuz, despite this MOU. Iran's now warning ships not to cross the strait without permission or risk facing consequences. Ultimately, do you think this memorandum of understanding is a good deal? And do you have any idea who controls the Strait of Hormuz right now?
Well, I think that's up for debate because we've seen some of the kinetic actions there. But at a fundamental level, I just simply don't trust the Iranian leadership, the mullahs, to live up to their commitments. We're already seeing it. I mean, my goodness, Jake, how many ceasefires have we had over the past several months? And this one was supposed to be keyed to a 60-day agreement. So there's a lot of work to be done. And I just fundamentally do not trust the Iranians. I don't believe that they were any more faithful to the that they will be any more faithful to this agreement than the JCPOA unless it is buttoned down tight. And I just don't see that happening in 60 days.
Turning to Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche and his attempt to become a permanent Attorney General. You're a key vote to make that happen. You met with him earlier this week. I understand there are a couple of sticking points. You will not accept any equivocation on January 6th, and you want Blanche to put a formal end to the president's so-called anti-weaponization fund. To start with, did he tell you unequivocally that the administration will not give money to January 6th protesters who attacked law enforcement? And did he tell you that Joe Biden was the lawful winner of the 2020 election?
Well, I don't ask the gamesman question about who won the election. I certified the vote on the 20th, and I'm not going to use that sort of a gimmick against Todd Blanche. He's a very competent attorney. I agree with what Bill Barr said in his op-ed this week, but there are matters that we need to settle finally. We need to get rid of the 1776 fund. Todd doesn't have any evidence that I've been able to find, nor I guess the press, on anything that would have tripped my Ed Martin January 6th equivocation. So it really comes down to trying to, let's get the 1776 fund out of the narrative. Let's get the audit piece out of the narrative. Let's focus on the Democrat Socialists of America that are taking over the Democratic Party, not these things that we've been told by the administration are rendered useless. They're not going to use it. Let's figure out a way to end them completely, to remove the distraction of a good nominee coming before judiciary.
I guess the question is, when push came to shove with Attorney General Bill Barr, he refused to go along with Trump's election lies in 2020. And the question is, do you think Todd Blanche would do the same thing, would stand up for the right thing? The New York Times is reporting that Acting Director of National Intelligence Bill Pulte, who has no qualifications for that job, as you know, has installed a Republican political operative, Christina Norton, as his chief of staff at the spy agency. Norton's work in the past focused on election issues for the Republican Party. And there's this broader context that you know about. There are a lot of concerns about what the president and his team might be planning for the elections, whether it's Pulte and Norton, or, as we read in Regime Change, Nicolas Maduro offering to back up Trump's lie about Venezuela altering the election. We have election denier Kurt Olson given a position in the administration, ordering the seizure of Atlanta voting machines, Tulsi Gabbard, or seizing voting machines from Puerto Rico. How do you see all this fitting together?
Well, first, I think you know my position on Pulte. I don't think he should be in the administration, let alone in charge of DNI. He is singularly responsible for 702 beginning to go dark because of a lack of confidence of him in that role. So he needs to get out. We need to get a credible person in the role. And frankly, I think ultimately we should end DNI and go back to the intelligence community, the posture that we had before 9/11. We just have to address the lapses that were addressed through DNI. I think we're past that now after 25 years. My goodness, we should be able to have interagency integration. We should eliminate the DNI, and we should eliminate Pulte from the DNI until that happens. I am concerned that we're going to continue to cast doubt on elections in November and erode what has been a 250-year tradition of a peaceful transition of power. I have people telling me I need to implement the SAVE Act immediately in North Carolina, in a state that has voter ID. It was passed when I was Speaker. We've enhanced it even since then, and the president's won 3 times. Why do I, over the next 4 months, have to try to pursue the impossible task of implementing a bill that simply can't be implemented in that time frame? Why are we doing more things to undermine our confidence in elections rather than getting the strong message out that will win for Republicans this year? talk about the emergence and the rise of the Democrat Socialist of America, accept that the voting laws are going to be fundamentally what they are today, win by them, win by the good results that Republicans have produced, and stop undermining the confidence in the elections. This is a bedrock of our 250-year history of success as the democracy that changed the world. Let's not mess with that between now and November.
Bill Barr did the right thing when it came down to it. He stood up for the truth. He stood up for the facts. How confident are you that Todd Blanche would do the same?
I at this point, I'm going to go through the nomination process. I've got a positive predisposition towards Blanche. He is one of the key reasons why we were able to work with the DOJ and get to a good place on Warsh. But if there's even a whiff of a lack of independence, then that could influence my vote. But right now, I'm confident in what we see with Blanche. If we can address these distractions that have to get off the table before his confirmation, particularly the 1776 fund, let's just put it away. The president, the acting attorney general, others in the administration said that they've determined it's inoperative. They're not going to move forward with it. Let's make it inoperative. The Cassidy Amendment, incidentally, a few weeks ago would have done that, which for the life of me, I don't know why Republicans didn't support. But let's try and figure out a way to completely and finally end these distractions so that we can focus on the damage Democrats could do if they take the House, if they beat incumbent Republicans in the Senate. That's what Republicans need to be talking about between now and November.
Republican Senator Thom Tillis from the great state of North Carolina. Always good to have you on, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Up next, should our next president be...
I'm actually fascinated by Nixon as a character in history. I think that his historical legacy is enjoying a bit of a renaissance, but I think deservedly so. As I joked with Robert backstage, if Watergate happened tomorrow, it would be like a 12-hour news story. Like, the idea that it would have taken down a presidency is crazy.
All right, the roundtable is here. Our congressional correspondent, Jay O'Brien, SCOTUS blog editor Sarah Isger, editor of the National Review, Ramesh Ponnuru, and Center for American Progress CEO, Neera Tanden. Neera, let me start with you. You've worked with people that went by the name Obama and Clinton. You've worked with the Democratic establishment. So who's right? Is this movement in New York kind of isolated to a few very liberal parts of the city, or is it a national movement?
Well, I think what we saw on Tuesday was in New York City, very liberal candidates won in a very liberal place, but the party also put up moderate candidates to go in to compete in swing districts. But, you know, when Mayor Mamdani talks about a politics of working people and lowering childcare costs and lowering the rent and addressing public safety, you know, that's a message that I think actually resonates with a lot of Democrats. There's some candidates on Tuesday night who had some more extreme views. You mentioned those views. Those, I think a lot of Democrats, when they're asked, are going to say they disagree. But when candidates are asked about universal child care, that's been a position of the Democratic Party for at least a decade. Joe Biden campaigned and tried to do that. So I think when you're talking about those issues, there's a lot of unity in the Democratic Party. On some of these positions, there's going to be a lot more criticism.
Sir, it is astounding. This is a guy who's 34 years old, new to politics on a stage, anything like this. And he has been hammered this week by both the Democratic establishment and Republicans, and he seems entirely unflappable. And it seems like he's riding high.
I mean, this is a talented guy. Like, dismiss him, you know, at your peril, as Democrats just learned. But what's interesting is, you know, that whole interview, he is very on message, right? This is about working class voters, working class, working class. But that's not actually how they won these primaries. It is the whiter, wealthier members of these districts who voted in these very extreme candidates.
These are poor districts, not the poorest in the city.
But the more multiracial, the more working class parts of the district voted for other candidates. And I think that's the danger for Democrats moving forward, is that this
is an elitist movement, actually.
Yeah, that the Democratic Party overall is getting whiter and wealthier, and the Republican Party is getting actually closer to the working class. And we've seen the two parties realign over the last 10 years. And a lot of both parties don't seem to recognize what that actually means for voter turnout, for grassroots building, because they think they're still living in a Reagan Republican Party era.
It is interesting that there was another race in New York, congressional primary. Richie Torres, progressive Democrat who was also one of the strongest supporters of Israel in Congress, absolutely unapologetic supporter of Israel, ran against challenger who made that an issue, and he won by 50 points in a district that's poorer.
Yeah, you know, I don't think that most voters in the United States are actually as obsessed about foreign policy and the Israel policy in particular as the political conversation often is. What struck me particularly about the Goldman-Lander race, where you had Israel as at the forefront of that race, is part of what's going on here is Democratic voters are frustrated at the failure of the party to effectively fight Trump. And Goldman, of course, helped lead impeachment against Trump. But I think a lot of Democratic voters look at all of those efforts and say, yeah, but Trump survived impeachment.
They didn't work.
It didn't work. Trump's got back in power, has been able to achieve a lot of things that we don't like. And there's this degree of frustration that I think was part of the explanation for what happened in those primaries.
And Jay, he went up against the Democratic establishment. He went up directly against Hakeem Jeffries, who supported these incumbents. And now we saw Senator Alyssa Slotkin come out this week and say that we need new Democratic leadership, including, she suggested, Jeffries. How's that playing? I mean, where does that stand?
This is going to be a headache for Hakeem Jeffries no matter what. The question is, how big of a headache is it going to be? As Neera said, candidates up and down Democratic ballots are going to be asked about the positions of these Mandami candidates. But then the question is, how far does this go to trouble Hakeem Jeffries if they take back the House? Is there kind of an insurgent movement to not elect him as the leader? Or even if he becomes the leader and the speaker, then what happens? Because he's still got a very fractious Democratic caucus here. And Hakeem Jeffries' claim to fame with that caucus is his ability to manage it. So if you've got louder voices who are not the majority of the caucus but make more of a problem for him, it undercuts his, again, claim to fame, which is ability to manage all the voices in the caucus.
Ask Paul Ryan how that went, right? This is a mirror of what happened with the Tea Party movement taking over the Republican Party slowly and then all at once. After Mitt Romney lost in 2012, they reject the Republican autopsy, and everyone's like, oh, this will hurt them nationally. Donald Trump wins. This is the weakness of political parties today. We're in this very partisan moment, but the political parties themselves have no power over who their standard bearers will be.
The only difference I'd say is back then, Republicans were putting up some of their most extreme candidates in races, in swing races. That's how Senator Reid got reelected against Sharon Ingle, for anyone who can remember that. And here,
Let me
Democrats
introduce you to Maine.
Maine and Michigan. I will say, we will see what happens. But Caitlin Conley, others have won. Even last week, Democratic voters voted for candidates like Kate Conley and Nancy LaCour in South Carolina and New York 17, who they believe have the best chance, who are moderate candidates who have the best chance of knocking out Republicans. Voters in the Democratic Party are still, to this day, mostly voting for candidates who can win and swing elections and
but Maine and
represent.
Michigan are
These
two
are
test
questions.
cases.
And Michigan will be a test case in the future, and Maine is a test case as well. But overall, these candidates, and also, I mean, to say it, Plattner was doing better against Susan Collins in the polls than Janet Mills was, and that is the question.
So can I switch from Democratic dysfunction to Republican dysfunction for a second?
Please.
I just want to play something from Tucker Carlson. You may remember him this week. Take a listen. All right, and Marjorie Taylor Greene, you also remember her, responded to that on X saying that there are a lot of us absolutely fed up who will not support a party that betrays its voters and its country. We are done with the America Last Republican Party. Let's start with you, Sarah. Does it matter?
Yes and no, right? These two people do not matter, but again, you are seeing a political party lose control over what it is and what it stands for, and this is part of the fracturing of that whole movement. And we're not even at horseshoe politics anymore. I think it's just a full circle at this point. And so the anti-Semitism on the left and the right, the obsession with Israel that is not actually about foreign policy, or else you'd see a whole bunch of other countries involved in this. The amount of money that is being spent on Israel is a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of anything these people are talking about. It is a dog whistle because it is easier to form a coalition against something, about hating something, than it is to be for something. And that's what our whole government is right now, is against instead of actually doing things.
But Rush, let me get to Tucker Carlson specifically for a second, because this is not just any, influencer. This is a guy who was very close to the president. As I mentioned, sat next to him in the presidential box at his convention, visited the White House a lot over the past year, very close to J.D. Vance. What does this do to J.D. Vance? Because he is still very close to J.D. Vance.
Well, I think one of the things that's happened here is Tucker Carlson has had a huge audience, but he has vastly overestimated how many Americans he speaks for. So has Marjorie Taylor Greene. And I think we saw that particularly at the beginning of the Iran war. Now, I didn't think this was a particularly wise war, but the fact is the vast number of Republicans supported it, and it didn't matter what Tucker Carlson had to say. The question for Vance, I think, is to what degree does he get misled by online popularity into catering to a segment of the party that is not representative of the Republican Party, let alone the public at large?
And Jay, what a week on Capitol Hill. I mean, the president up against the Republican leadership. I've never seen John Thune look more uncomfortable. It's when Trump suddenly pulled the plug on his on the housing bill that had just passed.
Well, when you think about the people, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Tucker Carlson, that Sarah said do not have power, there are people on Capitol Hill who very much do, and they're not turning against the party, but they are turning against President Trump. They've been called the YOLO caucus, right? It's these members that Donald Trump viewed as disloyal. He primaried out, and he caused himself an issue here because they're going to be senators.
Cassidy, Cornyn.
Tillis to a degree, not primary, but not running for re-election. That is a crew. They're going to be senators until January. So they are going to be able to throw sand in the gears of what Donald Trump wants to do. And they have already shown that they're willing to do that, and they're emboldened. Think about Bill Cassidy yelling at Donald Trump in a closed-door Senate lunch. That is something match. In a shouting match. Trump called him a lunatic. Cassidy called him brother. Trump said, "I'm not your brother." Point is, that would have been unthinkable a year ago.
Yeah, I mean, I think both of these things are an indication. We talk about the politics of these people and their personalities, but what you're actually seeing is Republican voters. I mean, Trump is losing some voters who voted for him 3 times. I think the Iran war is a huge part of that. They did not expect the Iran war. They're paying for it. You're seeing cracks in his coalition. That's why I think Tucker Carlson is actually important, because it's not Tucker Carlson per se, but he's actually representing his own, a group of people who've already fallen away from the president. And I think what's really under-discussed is how angry people are about the Iran war, that no one expected this war, and it is a war that we seem to be losing, and we're all paying for it. That is a failure that is going to have consequences for the president, not just with Democrats or independents, but with Republicans.
The question for Republicans is, when does Donald Trump, or did Donald Trump, become a lame duck, and who's going to step in? Because as soon as J.D. Vance steps up, Donald Trump's going to attack him. And so nobody's trying to run for president for 2028 on the Republican side.
He's really going to attack J.D. Vance?
Absolutely. To prevent himself from being a lame duck? Yes. But you're seeing now these lame duck senators. And remember, the magic number is 4. That's how many senators Republicans can lose before they no longer have a majority. You named 3. I'll add McConnell to that. And we're at 4. And Donald Trump doesn't seem to recognize that or care.
Well, the other thing is, the number one issue that got Trump elected was the cost of living and inflation. And Trump has not only taken steps that make that worse, the Iran war being prominent among them, tariffs being another, but he has just very visibly demonstrated that he doesn't care about this question. He has explicitly been saying,
although he sure seems determined now to end the war. I mean, how many provocations can he say,
Right, but after a year when the top issue for the public was very obviously less important to him than renovating the East Wing, I think it becomes very difficult to say we have the voters' interests in mind.
Or he canceled the signing of the housing bill, and that is a cost of living issue, a bipartisan piece of legislation.
And attacked it as an Elizabeth Warren bill, even as the others praised it.
And he's doing it because of an issue about election law that most Americans aren't focused on, but Trump himself cares deeply.
I mean, you just forgot the most important thing that he's been focused on, which is the reflecting pool. Right. That is another area that he's got a lot of his attention as well. Yeah.
Very quickly, what about that Nixon comment from J.D. Vance?
Well, it's interesting because for many years, the Republican Party revered Reagan much more than Nixon, partly because Reagan was a successful president, and Nixon, of course, ended his presidency in disgrace. But there's been a concerted effort by people around Trump to kind of move away from Reagan. the small government message, the optimism, the pro-growth orientation, none of that is really central to the Trump-Vance brand, and they want to kind of erase that legacy and replace it. And I think that's what
now
this
the
is part
party of Nixon. We can get our Nixon tattoos.
The last liberal president.
All right. Up next, my conversation with Senators Mark Kelly and Todd Young about the challenges of bipartisanship in the current moment. We're back in 2 minutes.
How hard is it in this administration, Senator, to take a stand against this president?
Well, I think it's harder.
Courage Can Save Us. That's the title of a new book on veterans in Congress who have shown courage both on and off the battlefield. Author Ry Barcott profiled 5 Republicans and 5 Democrats who he says have the courage to meet the moment. We spoke with Ry, Senator Mark Kelly, and Senator Todd Young about how they are trying to bridge the divide and fix our broken politics.
You are recruiting and supporting veterans who want to run for office, who meet certain criteria. Again, it's bipartisan, it's not ideological. Because you believe, and you believe there is evidence that military veterans are more likely to show the kind of political courage and also to cross party lines.
That's exactly right. So With Honor has helped support over 100 veterans. There are about 50 that are currently in Congress, and they take a pledge to serve with integrity, civility, and courage, including the courage to work across party lines, not necessarily agree with every policy, but to maintain that trust to address matters that really are important to the country.
Senator Young, you served in the Marines. How does that service inform what you do here? This is a very different kind of courage.
It is. This sort of courage, in some respects, is one that's less familiar to many people. It's the courage to be misunderstood by people you respect and love and whose values you share on difficult issues. It's the courage to do unpopular things and to be held to account or to be able to persuade people. So there's uncertainty and risk associated with those sorts of things. But I feel like that sort of courage, which is emphasized in military service, is necessary in order to serve the common good in divided times. People don't send us here to be influencers. They don't send us here to make political statements. But in the end, they send us here to solve hard problems, working with people who don't always see the world the same way we do.
The argument that the book makes is that, again, courage and civility, only courage and civility will save us. But doesn't political courage often look uncivil? I mean, you need to stand up, you need to go up against the prevailing view, you need to maybe stand up against somebody in your own party.
You also have to do stuff that also might not be in your own personal best interest.
Yeah.
At times in this job. In the United States Senate. You have to take stands that you know are the right thing for the nation, that moves us forward in a positive way, but could be politically harmful to you and your career. That's hard for some folks.
Well, let's get to something uncomfortable here. Senator Young, what was your reaction when the President of the United States accused Senator Kelly of sedition, punishable by death, when the Secretary of Defense tried to punish him?
I'm glad you asked.
Because he made a video telling the message that people shouldn't, service members shouldn't obey unlawful orders.
So as Mark can share with you, my first reaction was to text Mark and engage in a dialogue that very morning. And we had an exchange back and forth, an exchange which I will keep private about what I should do, how I should respond, where this led, and so forth. And so it demonstrates that it's really important to develop trust among your colleagues and solidarity, even during what I know was a difficult time for Mark. I like to think, because we've developed that partnership, it leads to constructive action on things like shipbuilding. These are difficult times. They're difficult times for people.
Can I just press you for a second? It seemed like a pretty outrageous thing. The President of the United States suggesting that this senator next to you could be put to death for something he said. And there wasn't much of an outcry among Republicans in Congress over that. It was a kind of like...
No, it does lead to a larger question, which is, why am I here, Jonathan?
Yeah.
Am I here to hold forth every time I have a concern about utterances or even actions, but render myself unable then to work on broader initiatives that are important to my constituents on behalf of my constituents in the country, or am I here to narrate a presidency? There are times when one must speak up when you feel strongly about things. That was a case when one could fairly say that should have been the singular moment. But just keep in mind that there are trade-offs, and this gets back to what Mark was talking about. It's very difficult, this job, to navigate the shoals and assess, you know, the moral calculus of the moment and assess when you should go to the wall, so to speak.
Jonathan, I had one of my colleagues, who I won't mention who it was, but said, hey, this is a food fight. When this turns into a knife fight, I will say something. Yeah. So there's a little bit of that. I mean, sometimes this feels like a knife fight for me. I've been to...
I mean, when the President of the United States is saying you could be put to death...
Well, also when you find out that they're in front of a grand jury. And
right.
By the way, they don't...
Tried to indict you and failed.
Yes, yeah, for seditious conspiracy.
Yes.
Let me add this. I've had conversations with the White House since this episode played out in a very public way. And the question was, naturally, we've been working on this shipbuilding initiative. Is it going to be a problem that I'm working with Senator Kelly in this initiative, because we're investing a lot of time and energy on this? And the answer was no. No, we think it's important that ships be built. Yeah. We welcome your collective efforts, your bipartisan
we'll work with
efforts.
the guy that we're accusing of seditious conspiracy.
Yeah. And so it is complicated. There's no question.
Well, you got to compartmentalize things.
Right.
We're all adults. We understand the complexities of our own individual politics, and certainly how complex it is, especially for Republicans with this administration in particular. Yeah. It's not. It's really not. I'd say in this situation, it's easier to be in the minority.
Yeah.
To be in the majority and the leader of your party is, fair to say, very unconventional about how he approaches this job. It is very complicated for them.
Well, look, you, as a newly minted senator, took on the president of your own party over immigration.
Yeah.
I mean, you were barely in the Senate.
Right.
And it was an unpopular view. I mean, it's written about, you write about it in the book.
Yeah, and he created, or responsible for, I think is really fair to say.
Yeah.
I think it's also fair to say created a crisis at the southern border.
Biden did, with how he handled the...
Yeah, the Biden administration did a bad job at the border. Now, I am a border senator. I represent the state of Arizona, and this was affecting my constituents more than it was affecting, let's say, Todd's in Indiana. So, yes, I wound up in a situation with them where I had to do some unpopular things, and I think unpopular things for being a Democrat.
Right, and you took heat, but how hard is it in this administration, Senator, to take a stand against this president?
Well, I think it's harder.
I mean, you've seen two of your colleagues lose primaries, two sitting senators lose primaries. Because the President of the United States didn't support their opponent.
Well, in a sense, you can't fault the president for using the leverage he has to affect the agenda he was elected to implement. He is a master of social media. He has more loyal political followers than I've ever encountered in political life, and he's used those. We've never seen a president have those tools, have that sort of leverage against Congress before in my lifetime. And so, does it require a more sophisticated, more nimble sort of public leadership? I think it does. Yes, but that in no way absolves myself or any of my colleagues, Republican or Democrat, from the agency we have. We still need to sacrifice when we feel like the common good can be advanced through personal sacrifice. We still need to cast principled votes and work on ambitious projects and make those arguments, and I've attempted to do that.
How does this all look at America 250, which the celebrations itself are being politicized?
You know, we are clearly very divided.
Yeah.
Americans are not optimistic at this point. Congress is deeply unpopular. My view on this, and I'm sure, you know, Todd might disagree, is that we have a president that looks at every opportunity, not as an opportunity to bring the country together, but to further divide us. And even this 250th celebration, this is really an opportunity to think about like the history of our country and all the great things we've done, all the innovation. But what's going to happen on July 4th?
Yeah.
We're going to have a rally.
Well, Mark was kind to recognize that I would have a different perspective, and he's not wrong. Yeah. I do have a different perspective. Yeah. I think that lets our country off a little too easy. I think the reason we're so divided right now, and the reason we have a government that we're unhappy with, is because the American people have elected the current crop of senators, of congressmen,
the president,
of the president, all of us, and they haven't demanded more of us. I mean, really, this is in the American people's hands. You ask about the 250th. This is an experiment. It is a fragile experiment, and it only exists if the American people take command of this country, and if they have challenges with the way we're being led, then put people in office that can do a better job. So it's in the American people's hands.
Life better. And these candidates, Brad, Daria Lisa, Claire, they ran campaigns that spoke to working people and that said life in the nation's most expensive city need not be this way any longer. And I can't wait to have them as partners in D.C. in that work.
So do you see yourself endorsing candidates outside of New York, or?
You know, for now, my focus is on this incredible slate of 3 congressional candidates, as well as you said, the 5 candidates I endorsed who ran and won, who are all going to be heading to Albany in the state legislature. But I do think, as you said, it's not just New York City where working people are asking themselves, why can't I afford my rent? Why can't I afford my groceries? Why can't I find enough money in my pocket for childcare, no matter how hard I work? And I'm so excited that these incredible soon-to-be Congress members will be helping to lead the fight across the country on making sure that working people are right there where they should be, which is the heart of the conversation.
The reaction from Democrats has been something. You've had some prominent Democrats dismissive of what happened here. I mean, you had Senator Blumenthal say the effort to nationalize New York is going to fail. What happened in New York will be really irrelevant by the time of the elections in November. Hakeem Jeffries basically said the same thing, saying that this is not indicative of what needs to happen in November. What do you make of that?
You know, I think that when you ask Americans what they're feeling in this moment, amidst reports of an economy that's strengthening, of a stock market that's booming, you will hear an exhaustion and having to try and make ends meet every single day, every single week, every single month, and that it's getting harder and harder. And so a message of fighting for working people, we don't have to nationalize that message. That is a national message. It's a national crisis. And for far too long, all we've had to say as a party is opposition to the current administration. What do we have to say beyond that? And what these candidates offer is a vision that extends beyond the midterms, it extends beyond 2028. It speaks to what makes so many of us proud to be Democrats. It speaks to a vision that goes back to a New Deal understanding of what working people deserve. And I'll tell you that for too long, that kind of politics, you can only find it in history books, and we need to bring it back to the present day.
And you're hearing some not just dismissive, though. There's resentment. And this is from fellow Democrats who think that this could jeopardize Democratic chances in the fall. I mean, you've got Josh Gottheimer, a Democratic member of Congress, says, many of us believe, as do I, if you're a socialist, you are not a Democrat. And in fact, they put out a manifesto today. I don't know, have you seen this thing?
Sounds pretty socialist to me.
It's not a communist manifesto. It's a moderate manifesto. saying, we are capitalist, not socialist. We believe in a growing, fair, and competitive economy, entrepreneurship, ownership. I mean, this is a direct response, they've made it clear, to what you did here on Tuesday.
Well, I mean, that's great, but what's a party if not its voters? And I'm proud to sit in front of you as the mayor of our city, having received more than 1 million votes, a little less than a year ago. And when we're talking about these incredible congressional candidates, they won their races, and they won their races with a vision of what politics should be, and one that actually speaks to working people. And for a lot of people who ask themselves, what does democratic socialism mean? And you can tell them the answer at a theoretical level. It's the choice to extend democracy from the ballot box the rest of their lives. But in terms of what it means over these last 7 months, we've seen a city with democratic socialist principles at the heart of it within our administration. And what we've delivered has been record lows when it comes to murders and shootings.
So is it pragmatic democratic socialism?
I think democratic socialism at the heart is pragmatic, because if we cannot deliver for working people, then what is this for? I'm not interested in writing a manifesto or, frankly, in reading one. I'm interested in delivering, and that's exactly what we've been showing.
But they're saying that if you're a socialist, you're not a Democrat. I mean, is there room in the party for both of these views?
Yes, here I am. Here are so many more. And I think what makes our party a beautiful party is the fact that it's a big tent, that we have
But you've also said it has to be a party with a spine, with a backbone.
Yes,
So
even a tent has to stay up.
Yes, so, you know, does it have to stand firmly for these ideas that you're talking about that others are calling dangerous?
I think it has to stand for working people. And I think it has to be willing to fight for working people. And I think that there are some who are offended by the prospect of a party that knows who it fights for and goes every day to work for that. Because what we've seen over many years is a willingness to not only explain away the status quo, but frankly even to look to benefit from the status quo. And that's not what working people are looking for from our party.
As New Yorkers were going to vote, you said something interesting. You said the race for 2028 starts now, the presidential race. What did you mean by that?
Well, a lot of pundits ask me about this race and what it means and how to think about it. And at the core of Tuesday's results was a message from Democratic voters across the largest city in the United States of America about the kind of politics they want to see. And we know that we oppose the cruelty of the federal administration. What is it that we stand for beyond that?
So you can't just be anti-Trump,
You can't.
obviously.
You got to have something you are not just willing to stand up for, but that you're also willing to explain how this is relevant to working people. And I think this just comes back to the fact that I'm leading a city that's the wealthiest city in the wealthiest country in the history of the world. I could end the sentence there and say that life is great for 8.5 million people, but it's also a city where 1 in 4 are living in poverty. And for far too many Americans, those contradictions have become their day-to-day life. And we need a party that's able to recognize the strengths of this economy and understand that it hasn't reached enough people.
Now, you know, there's been a lot of attention. One of the candidates you supported who won, who knocked off an incumbent Democrat, is Darlisa Villa-Chevalier. She said some very controversial things, including calling for the abolition of prisons, couldn't say whether or not somebody who had committed murder should be in prison, called for open borders against all deportations, including those of violent criminals. Are those positions that the Democratic Party could win on nationally?
I think what the Democratic Party can win on nationally is a focus on working people. And I think that what I saw from Darlisa when I would walk the streets of her district was a focus on what she describes as a politics of life. She would talk about how we have to invest in babies, not bombs. She's now going to represent what is one of the poorest districts in the United States of America. And what people in that district are exhausted by is a politics that has justified the spending of tens of billions of dollars in killing civilians overseas, while working people are struggling just to do the basics.
But how does abolishing prisons or having open borders fit into that? I mean, do you see how those are ideas that a lot of your Democrats that are warning about what happened here say are toxic? Most of America won't go along with it. Are bad ideas. They're dangerous ideas.
I think what the focus of her race was, what the focus of her candidacy was about the struggle that working people are facing. And I think that we can have disagreements on policy positions. What we have to agree on is what are we fighting for and who are we fighting for? She showed that in her race, and I think think that many people will come to appreciate that in her leadership to come.
So we can disagree on something as basic as whether or not there should be prisons?
That's
not your position.
There are prisons,
yes.
And what we're also showing in this city is that safety is not something that's up for debate. It's something that we're actually delivering on, and I'm proud to be the mayor of a city that currently has the lowest recorded number of murders and shootings in recorded history in New York City.
So there was also a take, it's not just Democrats, you've probably heard what President Trump had to say about you and about the candidates you supported, and he warned that if socialists win, and he calls you communists, but you will start living in squalor, there'll be no food, no housing, no military, no law and order, there'll be nothing, and he had a few other choice words. By the way, he also said he still likes you. But what do you make of what he? I mean, the Republicans are going to make you the poster child for the Democratic Party.
Let them. We don't have to ask ourselves what life looks like if a socialist wins. I won last November, and over the course of these last 6 months, what we've delivered for working people are the very things we were told were impossible. We've delivered free childcare for 2-year-olds for the first time in New York City history. We've delivered tens of millions of dollars back to tenants who were taken advantage of by bad landlords. We've delivered 165,000 potholes being paved. And we've done all of these things while also delivering the lowest recorded crime in our city's history. That's what it looks like to have democratic socialism. And what you're seeing is that New Yorkers experienced this for 6 months and made the decision that they wanted to see more of it on the national stage as well.
Can a democratic socialist get elected president?
I think a democratic socialist can get elected anywhere across this country for any position. What I think we need to bring is a focus on working people.
And that's the direction that the party should go in terms of selecting a candidate for 2028.
I think the direction that the party should go in is how best to fight for working people. I think we need to have a platform and a vision that doesn't sound as if it was cooked up by consultants, but instead one that you would say in response to someone who's asking, why can't I afford my rent? Why can't I afford my groceries? Why can't I afford my childcare? We need to make clear who we stand for, how we're going to stand for them, and that we're actually willing to fight for them when the going gets tough.
Obviously, Israel was a big issue in these races. Not the only issue, but a big issue. Is there room in the Democratic Party for candidates, officials who support Israel, not just support Israel, but support military aid for Israel? This was a huge issue for you.
Well, I think what we've seen is that the time for us as elected officials to pronounce what the party should be is one that should come to an end, and we should let Democratic voters themselves take the lead. And we've seen on Tuesday evening, we saw Democrats turn out in districts across the city to make clear that they were tired of tens of billions of dollars being spent in our taxpayer dollars to violate international law, to kill thousands of civilians. And you and I know that right now, the way that Palestine is described is as if there is a ceasefire. That's the language that's typically used. Yeah. More than 1,000 Palestinians have been killed in that ceasefire. And what New Yorkers want to see is a politics of conscience, a politics of clarity, a politics of conviction. And to follow international law, to believe in the humanity of all people, it shouldn't be a journey too far. And I think that our party needs to hear what Democrats are telling it.
Democratic Socialists of America now says they no longer favor a two-state solution. Is that the way you see it as well? The idea of 2 states, Palestinian, Jewish state side by side living in peace?
The way I see it is equal rights for all people. And I think that that's the truth for Israel. It's the truth for any country in the world. And frankly, as we're coming up close to the 250th anniversary of our nation, one of the things that makes me proudest to be an American is the belief that equal rights are at the bedrock of our notion of what it means to be an American.
And the idea of a Jewish state, Israel is a Jewish state, that's in the charter. That's the way it is now. Do you support that?
I've said time and again that I support the state of Israel as a state with equal rights. I believe that any state that preferences...
But as a Jewish state is the question.
I think any state that privileges one religion over the other is one that I can't tell you I support, whether it be Israel or Saudi Arabia or anywhere else. And a lot of that comes back to a fundamental belief that we should all be considered equal no matter what our faith is.
How big a problem, you said it's rising, is anti-Semitism in this city?
We've seen anti-Semitism rise in this city. We've seen the fact that Jewish New Yorkers comprise a minority of our city's population and yet continue to constitute a majority of the hate crimes that have been pervaded in this city. And that's something that's unacceptable. It's something that we will never come to see as if it is a part of life. It's something that has to be fought and rooted out of every one of the 5 boroughs.
What did you think when Dan Goldman, did that coffee shop in Brooklyn, said that they wouldn't serve him because of his support for Israel? You have a problem with, I mean, the idea of, you know, of a establishment like that saying they're not going to serve somebody if they support Israel?
I've said that I have political disagreements with Congressmember Goldman. I do believe that that's a response that goes beyond that.
So that's not the right kind of thing?
No, I think it's much better to keep that critique in the way that we've done it.
Okay, so we're just about out of time. I got to ask you, I noticed that you're turning 35 soon, right?
In a few months, yes.
So you now hit one of the constitutional requirements to run for president. But there's another one that says you have to be a natural-born citizen. You were not born here.
Yes.
But do you think that's something that should be changed in the Constitution? It would take an amendment, but do you think that we should change that?
No.
No?
I think the Constitution looks good the way it is.
Just the way it is.
Just the way it is. I'm very excited to focus on New York City, but thank you for reminding me of my upcoming
35
mortality.
years old. 35 years old. All right.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Mayor, thank you very much.
Real pleasure.
All right, and up next, the prominent figure in the MAGA movement, somebody who was sitting next to President Trump at the Republican convention and who now says there is no chance that he will support the Republican Party again. That and much more with the Roundtable when we return.
Now with more on what's at stake for America. Is the nation's 56th Speaker of the House, Congressman Mike Johnson, who is in his home district this weekend in Louisiana, meeting with constituents. Mr. Speaker, great to have you this morning. Welcome.
Maria, thanks so much. It's odd to see you there in my office. I'm heading back there this afternoon, but glad to be in Louisiana with some of the greatest people in the world.
Yeah, I'm here in your office. I was looking around. All the drawers are locked. I'm looking for the keys to see if I can start some trouble here, so I'll let you know what I find, Speaker.
That would be good trouble. You have access anywhere you want, Maria. And look, this truly is a very happy birthday celebration, as you noted at the outset. This is going to be an exciting week across our country, celebrating the greatest nation in the history of the world. It's not even close. And you and I know we talk about it all the time. As you noted, the most free, most successful, most powerful, most benevolent nation that has ever been. And it is our responsibility to steward that grand experiment in self-governance. We celebrate all that this week. It's going to be so exciting.
And we're so grateful for your leadership. Speaker, let's talk about where we've come from and what the founders envisioned. In God we trust, freedom and liberty. How do you assess the last 250 years? Tell us where we're coming from first.
Well, the experiment in self-governance has been a tremendous success, and the reason is because we're built upon these very firm foundations. This didn't happen by happenstance. It's because the founders studied and prayed and put together a matchless constitution, a system of government that followed, frankly, the admonitions of Scripture. The great statesman G.K. Chesterton once observed from Great Britain that America is the only nation in the world that was founded upon a creed. And he said it's listed with almost theological lucidity or clarity in the Declaration of Independence, which we celebrate this week. What is the creed? We hold these truths to be self-evident, the founders said. And what is a self-evident truth? It's something that's obvious. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. It doesn't say born equal, it says created equal, and that it is God, not the government, who gives us our inalienable rights. That foundational truth is what built America. It was the foundation of all of it, and is what we still celebrate and are fighting every day right now to preserve.
Yes, you're right, and you're doing that every day. And Speaker, I want to talk a little about where we're going. You are managing lots of different personalities in the Congress. You have a small margin to actually get the president's agenda passed. You had a rare bipartisan win with the housing bill, but of course now we're seeing that held up because of the president's threats to not sign it because he wants the Save America bill attached. What are you going to do about it?
Well, I met with the president for a few hours on Thursday in the Oval Office, and we talked about it in great detail. The housing bill really is a Republican priority because it will lower housing costs. We made a lot of promises to the voters, and we're fulfilling those every single day of this Congress. And this is a big part of that because it will increase the availability, the access to more housing, bring down cost, cut regulations, do the things that we know are very important for that market. The president and I talked about that at length. Of course, he wants to do all those things. I'm going to send the bill over to him. It's passed by both chambers. I'm sending it to him on Monday, and it will become law. And I certainly want him to take the biggest, boldest marker that he has and do that big Trump signature proudly on that legislation, because we're delivering for the people, and that's what he wants to do.
But of course, more important to the president is the Save America Act. There was a real showdown in the House last week. Anna Paulina Luna saying she's not going to move anything forward from her vote because she wants the Senate to attach the Save America Act to whatever legislation they're pushing. Can you tell us what happened and whether or not you believe that can get across the finish line? I know you've passed it many times in the House.
We have, and the president and I laughed about it in the Oval last week. I told him, you know, Mr. President, I don't have any tattoos, but if I did, it'd say Save America on my shoulder, okay? We passed it 3 times in the House already. We're going to pass it again, and this time we're going to try to put it on a reconciliation bill, and the reason that's so important, Maria, as you know, is it prevents the necessity of 60 votes in the Senate. The Democrats want no part of this. And remember, this is very basic stuff. We're just going to make sure you have to have proof of citizenship to register to vote, and then show an ID when you turn out at the ballot box. These are 90-10 public opinion issues, and more than 70% of Democrats want to do it, but not the Democrats in the House and Senate. And so we've got to go around them. And I told Anna Paulina Luna and a couple other colleagues, I said, it makes no sense for us to shut down our good work in the House just because Senate Democrats refuse to do the people's will. We've got a lot more to do. We've got to keep it going.
Yeah, you're right. And the president also got involved, posting, saying, let's not blow everything up in the House because the Senate is not doing its job. The president, I assume, was responding to that same sentiment that you just raised.
He was. We talked about it when I was standing next to him when he truthed it. And the message was, listen, you know, don't turn the floor over to the radical left. That's what happens when the party in charge, the Republican Party, votes against its own rules to proceed with legislation. So, look, we'll get everybody together on Monday, tomorrow. We're bringing them all back. We've got a big week ahead of us of work before you begin all the celebrations on the weekend. Much more left to do. We've got the National Defense Authorization Act. We have appropriations where we're spending less money and doing it more efficiently and effectively. We have the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act we've got to reauthorize. We've got the Surface Transportation Bill. Many really important pieces of legislation. And, of course, Reconciliation 3.0. I got to have everybody working here on all cylinders, and I'm excited to bring them back.
That is awesome. Well, I know the Senate is gone until July 13th. They left without even a budget released. It's hard to think anything really gets done beyond that $87.6 billion supplemental for defense, especially since the parliamentarian already said, look, you've got to prove that you're actually looking at spending cuts if you're going to put the Save America Act in there.
That's right, and we've been looking at that very carefully, and we'll send them over a provision that fits and passes the bird test, as they call it over there, with the parliamentarian. And look, I met with Leader Thune. He's a good man. He's got a big challenge on his hands, of course, and I've encouraged him to do everything possible within his power to move it. I believe he will, Maria. He understands how important that is as well. Election integrity is critical. It's central. You know, we talk about preserving the republic. You got to have free and fair elections in order to do that, and we can't allow big blue states and crooked, Democrat governors to try to steal elections away from us. And this is a very important measure, a common sense one, again, that the American people believe in and encourage and support.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we appreciate your integrity. You're at the wheel at this incredible moment in time. Congratulations and happy birthday, America. Thank you, Speaker Mike Johnson.
Thanks, Maria. Appreciate you.
We'll see you soon. Thank you, sir.
So, Senator, as I understand it, the Vice President and Special Envoy Witkoff gave you a special briefing in the Situation Room late Wednesday on Iran. What you heard made you change your vote. Why are you no longer trying to stop the president from resuming strikes in Iran?
That actually was not my original rationale for voting for the War Powers Act. My original rationale was because we were not being briefed. We could be the Senate, the Congress, or the United States. And I felt it important that we be briefed. I agreed with the president's original goals. Those were not being achieved by my perception. Mm-hmm. And so before I could say, okay, everything's hunky-dory, I said, I need to be briefed. After the exchange I had with the president yesterday, I passed a note to Steve Witkoff. Steve, I would consider changing my vote, but I've been voting yes because I've not been briefed. he said. Called me back in the hour, and let's have a briefing. We had it last night.
What did you hear that changed your mind?
So if the original objections were to destroy, degrade, if you will, Iran's nuclear capability, their ability to do a ballistic missile, and their conventional warfare capability, and we were supposed to be out of there in 4 to 5 weeks, with maybe a little bit of a sprinkling of regime change. That's how it came across. The regime change is off the table. That doesn't seem as if that's going to happen.
Trump had that angry exchange, raised voices, you said, along with other Senate Republicans in this closed-door meeting. He berated you for that vote you had taken previously to try to stop the war. You said you won't be bullied. Did you feel that he backed down by giving you that briefing? I mean, isn't sharing information just a basic expectation that lawmakers like yourself should have fulfilled? Like, why does it take a shouting match?
Let's back up a little bit, if we may. I'm a doctor. I am going to try and get as much information as possible to come to the truth of someone's diagnosis and the truth of how to treat that problem. As much information as possible. You deny me that information, and I'm going to be frustrated because my job is to serve with the information I have before me. By the way, I take that same ethic to public service. Our society has problems. What is the truth behind the cause of that problem? What is the truth about how to solve it? If you're not telling me answers, I'm going to push for those answers. So when the president was berating the 4 people that voted for the War Powers Act, frankly, I'm not there to be berated. And the president wasn't invited to dish out verbal abuse.
But that's what he did.
I raised my hand. I said, Mr. President, do you just want, is that a rhetorical question that you're asking, why do we vote for it? Or are you really interested? He goes, I'm really interested. I stood up and I said, this is why. And I listed those objectives that I did not see being achieved and how the kind of endpoint of the war kept stretching out longer and longer. He began to speak over me. Unfortunately, I raised my volume to match his, and we spoke to each other like that. Or shall we say, spoke at each other, not to each other. Now, I shouldn't have lost my temper, nor should he. But, you know, my wife will tell you, every now and then my Irish temper gets the best of me. But point being, I needed to know. I need to know to serve my people in my state and my country. As it turns out, I got a briefing afterwards. In one sense, I actually accomplished the mission of what I needed to do.
But you had also said the American people need that information.
So
the American people aren't getting those public hearings and briefings.
So last night when I asked about that in my briefing, they said right now the negotiations are delicate. And they could collapse if they're not nursed along in the appropriate way. I can accept that. Sometimes you have to have some space for people to come to an accommodation. And that's how they said, that's the reason they said for their kind of lack of being forthcoming. I can accept that. But my goal was to be briefed, to have the truth in order to make a decision for the benefit of my country. And that was satisfied.
Because you had said something pretty significant. I mean, not only did you say this is the worst foreign policy blunder on record, Reagan be rolling in his grave, you said America lost the credible threat of force, which is another way of saying that President Trump's threats to return to bombing are empty threats.
I don't know if they're empty threats because you can certainly return to bombing. But the fact is that a medium-sized power at this point is perceived to have fought a superpower to a draw, requiring some measure of accommodation of we, the superpower. And we spent $29 billion, and we have 13 Americans dead. We hope to get back to status quo ante. I will say, in the briefing last night, they would make the argument that we've actually made progress. If that's the case, we should all be thankful.
Would you call for a vote for some kind of congressional oversight if an actual agreement is reached?
I think this would amount to a treaty. Congress has
does not?
I'm saying it would.
It would.
And so, I mean, I don't know the technical definition of a treaty. Seems like a treaty to me. And so if it is, then Congress should be able to weigh in.
Do you have that kind of commitment that when things aren't so delicate, Congress actually will be read in and perhaps put to a vote under INARA?
I think I've shown, at least on my level, that I'm willing to make tough votes in order to get that briefing that I feel I need to have the truth to make a decision that's good for my country. So we didn't talk about that last night, but I think that's a fair statement.
Okay. So you're going to keep pressing on this, is what I understand. I mean, there are a few Republicans like yourself who will be leaving Washington in January, and they're starting to speak perhaps with more candidness and frustration about the president and the way things are going here on the Hill. Will anyone else hold the president accountable once Cornyn's gone and Tillis is gone and you're gone?
The simple answer will be yes. The men and women who serve in Congress, by and large, love our country. I mean, they all love our country deeply. And by and large, they will do what is required. Now, when you're running for office, you have to be aware of what your voters are interested in. You have to talk about what your voters are interested in if you want to get reelected. But in the Senate, at least, there's that space of 4 years prior to that. And I think you see every period, there's senators that step up and say, we need something different. We need more. The Senate is a separate body, separate from the presidency. I think we're seeing that.
Do you think the president understands that?
I don't know if the president does. Sometimes he acts as if Congress is merely an appendage. And frankly, sometimes Congress acts like it's an appendage. But that said, I think you got the message yesterday. Congress wants to be read in. And Congress has our rules and procedures that our founding fathers set up. And they set it up precisely so that there would not be too powerful of an institution of a presidency, designed to reflect all of the American people, not just the will of one person.
That's being tested right now.
I suppose it's being tested, but hopefully we pass the test.
Well, the president seems to have some changing priorities himself when it comes to what he's asking you all to deliver on. He canceled that event on the bipartisan housing bill, which had strong support from both sides of the aisle. It was aimed at least at affordability. He seemed to sabotage his own nominee to run the intelligence community, Jay Clayton. He told him, don't show up for the hearing that Senate Republicans had scheduled. And he's been talking about the ballroom legislation like the SAVE Act, which Leader Thune has said there are not the votes for it. What do you think his priorities are right now?
Margaret, you're asking me to get inside the president's brain. I cannot get inside the president's brain.
You had lunch with him yesterday.
I did, but it wasn't really, you know, sipping tea with a pinky finger out and saying, hey, how do you feel about life? But clearly he wants the SAVE Act passed. So you can say that is a priority. What I think should be the priority is how do you make life more affordable for the American people? And so that's why I'm asking the president regularly, let's work on affordability of health care. The president has made a strong push to make health care more affordable. I want to make health care more affordable. So I can't tell you what his priorities are beyond the SAVE Act. I can tell you what I think they should be, and how do we make life more affordable for the average American?
The SAVE Act, he wants to put in place more restrictions around federal elections, but it's already federal law that non-citizens can't vote.
Yeah, but he's
races.
asking is that people have to show an ID.
Yeah.
And showing an ID, I think, is a reasonable thing. We've done it in Louisiana. There's been no disenfranchisement at all. But we had a reputation for corrupt elections, and now everybody acknowledges our elections are pretty straightforward. We've shed that reputation from 3 decades or 4 decades ago. So I think it's reasonable to require an ID.
But you agree with Leader Thune, there just aren't the votes.
They're not the votes.
Okay. You've also made clear you think that the Director of National Intelligence, Bill Pulte, he's in the position in an acting role presently, that he's not qualified. He has no national security experience. But he's in the job. And he can stay there for 210 days without Congress having a say here. I mean, is Congress powerless to put a check?
Once under the rules, and we live by the rules, the president can make an interim appointment and indeed he can stay there. Now, there may be other things we could do that the parliamentarian or someone can tell us. I'm not familiar with those. Let me tell you, though, why I do object to Bill. Our Declaration of Independence says that we are entitled, inalienable rights, I should say, to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And the pursuit of happiness is using my, kind of as I approach it, as I try and live my life, using the gifts I've been given for the purpose of serving other people. As a physician, I've been able to do that. As a senator, I've been able to do that. My objection to Bill is that he used personal information to target a political enemy of the president.
At the Federal Housing Administration.
At the Federal Housing Administration, using personal data. Now, if we have an inalienable right, I have, you have, the woman targeted has an inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I'm a conservative. You should not be using the force of government to crash upon somebody just because the person in charge does not like them or finds them inconvenient. The fact that Bill did that is disqualifying for someone to be the Director of National Intelligence. We should be about all people having access to that life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, not saying we're going to bring, boom, DOJ down on you because you have the nerve to disagree. And so that's the standard I hold him to, and as best I can tell, he does not meet that standard.
But as you said, there's not much Congress can do to get him out of that job unless the president allows for a new nominee to sit for a confirmation hearing. I mean, are there any checks on the abuses that you say Pulte has carried out in his current position at federal housing?
So you can see, one, you can go to court. So we have three branches, and one is the court. Secondly, Democrats have said they will not approve FISA until we do something about that DNI director. And the president, of course, should be concerned about FISA.
Is he?
Again, you're asking me to get inside the president's head. But my point being that the president, as a responsible agent, as the responsible servant of the American people, should be concerned about making sure that we don't have a cyber attack or that we don't have a terrorist cell coming into our nation. And so the Democrats are, if you will, holding that hostage. I'm not saying I agree with it because I think we need FISA reauthorized, but point being, they're all points of leverage.
But in the meantime, there's a standoff.
There's a little bit of a standoff, and that's
FISA's authority has expired.
Yes, my understanding is that it's continuing to be implemented, but nonetheless, there is a standoff.
It sounds like you have a lot of things you think the president should be focused on.
Well, if I were president, I'd be focused on things differently. If I were president, I'd be focused on what that family around the kitchen table is looking at as they go through their bills. As their child has an earache and they have a $3,000 deductible and they don't have the money in their checking account. As they come home from the grocery and the tension is there because they can't afford the groceries and everybody's frustrated. And when that couple is tense over money, the children feel it. The marriage is more likely to break up. And when a marriage breaks up, that child's marriage statistically is more likely to break up when they marry. There are consequences to the stress that our people are under. If I were president, I would be focused on those people, my people, our people, us, at the kitchen table. How do you make their life better? And that's what I think the president should be focused on.
Do you think your party is going to hold on to control of the Senate in the midterms? Because you're saying a message that you think needs to be said, but is not being really elevated at the moment.
I would argue that the housing bill begins to address that. The
one the president says he doesn't want to sign.
And the president has talked about making the price of prescription drugs more affordable. That's a very positive thing. But there's so much more to do. Gasoline prices, by the way, will be coming down with the successful resolution of the tie-up at the Strait of Hormuz. So there are positive things that are happening. There's more that needs to be done. I've been looking at credit card debt. Credit card debt, it's hard to believe, but I read that the average credit card debt for a family is $10,000. That's almost too much to believe. And that the percent of their income going to interest payments on that credit card debt is now up to like 3%. So they're not paying off the balance. They're carrying the load on 18 to 22% credit. That's something that we can do something about, I hope. That's why I'll go back to what I've been pushing for healthcare. My experience is that when a family has a $3,000 deductible, they don't have the money, they put it on the credit card, that debt goes up. Is there something we can do to make health, the cost of being insured, more affordable? And there is, and that's what I'm working on.
I want to talk to you about some of your priorities and what you want to work on. But let me just tie up what you're being asked to do, or what is being expected of you. You were one of 7 Republicans who voted to convict President Trump for his actions on January 6th of 2021. After January, there'll be only 1 or 2 senators who remain here, who took the stand you did. You've been fighting his attempts to create this $1.8 billion fund, compensation for those who felt they were wrongly prosecuted under the Biden administration, perhaps including some of these people who attacked the building we are sitting in right now. Do you trust that the acting Attorney General, Todd Blanche, that he won't move forward with the fund?
First, I prefer to say I voted to uphold the Constitution.
See what you're capable
and my
of.
oath of office, which is to protect the Constitution against all enemies, domestic and foreign. So let me just frame what my vote was that day.
Understood.
Secondly, you're asking about Attorney General Blanche. Right now, I am actively considering my vote for him. So I will reserve judgment. He has assured Congress that he will not use the weaponization fund. I will note that he's not given the same guarantee to the 7th District Court, if I have that right, down in Virginia, which has asked for a guarantee. He says, well, we don't think they have jurisdiction. But it doesn't seem hard to just write a letter saying we're not going to do it. But nonetheless, he has said that he is not going to. The president has sent conflicting signals. That's something that has to be sorted out before the vote.
Before you decide your vote, but you actually wrote a memo because the DOJ had said this fund was going to be created. They also said the U.S. is forever barred from prosecuting any claims against President Trump, his family, his businesses, and all related or affiliated individuals. Do you still object to that? Do you need Blanche to say something more clearly on that point?
I absolutely object to that, and I don't think that agreement should hold the force of law. If you think back to the second part of law, at the end of the Declaration of Independence, it is when our founding fathers say they pledge their life, their fortune, their sacred honor to fight for the inalienable rights that we all have. Again, I take that attitude, and I judge other people in the government by that attitude. Absolving somebody of any crime which they or their family may have objected to, may have committed, not just in terms of IRS audits, but like anything, seems a little bit far afield from the self-sacrifice that our founding fathers embraced. It seems more, I'm above everybody else, and I should be held to a different standard. Leaders should be held to a higher standard, not a different standard. They should be more accountable. They should be pledging their life, their liberty, their sacred honor. I should, as a senator. Frankly, I think all Americans should, whatever their role. But point being, I would object to anything that goes against the kind of spirit of that. And making one person above the law is wrong.
We're 4 months until midterms. You got 6 months left. Is healthcare your top priority?
So I've got so many things because I'm going to run through the tape. But right now we're working on Social Security. Social Security is insolvent, going insolvent. And when that happens, there'll be a cut of 22 to 25% in someone's benefits if we follow the current law. I've been working on a plan for about 6 years. I am still working on that plan, and I want to bring it to completion. How do you make healthcare more affordable? Second thing, in our HELP committee, of which I'm the chairman, we're working on price transparency. Wouldn't it be great if a mom, daughter has an earache, could say, hey Siri, where is the most affordable urgent care center near me? Oh, this one's $50 and that one's $500. And so she goes to the one that's $50. Let's give her the tool of price transparency so that she can make the best decision for her family's health, but also for her pocketbook.
From the vendor, not the insurance company.
From the both the vendor and the insurance company would have to publish what they are either charging or being paid. And it actually works where you need both. But in this case, there's people out there in the private sector creating these apps that take this information and would make it available for that mom who's looking for the best price for her daughter's earache. And so how do we bring healthcare, make it more affordable? One way is to give people the power of price transparency. By the way, I just got my renewal from Optum Rx for a prescription, $50. I'm thinking $50? It's never cost me that much. I go on to, I think, GoodRx or Mark Cuban's site, it's $7. The power of price transparency can make a meaningful difference. Lastly, or last thing I'll say, I'm working on something regarding dyslexia. 20% of us, we, have dyslexia. Where normally, you know, kind of how you read kind of tracks how smart you are, your IQ. Here, you can be a really bright child, but you can't read.
Yeah.
And that destroys someone's self-esteem. Statistically, if they don't overcome, they're more likely to end up in jail because illiteracy is such a major reason. So we've been working, and my daughter has dyslexia. We have been working on a solution for this. I'd like to bring that solution to completion before I finish. How do we make it so that these children are identified and hopefully set it up where they'll have the resources to accommodate their dyslexia?
Let me ask you about that. You said your daughter's dyslexic. Your wife, who's a breast surgeon, actually set up a school, as I understand it, to help those with learning differences. And you're working on this legislation you just said. It would make funds from the federal government available for literacy and early screening for dyslexia. Why does that need to happen at the federal level, not the state?
Well, one, it's not happening at the states. There are some states that have actually put in screening programs in the 1st and 2nd grade. But if the federal government kind of puts a little bit of oomph behind it, it's going to happen. And if you look at our reading scores, they've not really moved. Reading scores across the nation are kind of anchored. It makes sense. If 20% of the children learn to read differently, and we are not accommodating the difference in how they learn to read, then they're going to be stuck. And we lose that social capital. We are about life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. If someone cannot read, if they cannot be accommodated and learn to read, we just snuff that out. And we need to enhance it.
Well, the Trump administration is trying to dismantle the education department, though.
They would say it differently. They would say that they're transferring portions of the Department of Education, maybe dismantling, but still preserving the function.
And pushing it over HHS.
But by putting other agencies. And so we can argue about that. And some I agree with and some I don't. But in terms of dyslexia, we should be able to accomplish this. And we should. 20% of us are dyslexic. Some overcome, but some do not. And of course, I have a vested interest. My wife, as you mentioned, CEO of 3 public charter schools for children with dyslexia, starting a 4th in the outskirts of New Orleans. And you speak to the children. No, to the moms of the children. My child couldn't read, hated to go to school, cried every day. And now they're going to Purdue on an engineering scholarship.
Wow.
Yeah. Whoa. And so that's the difference you can make if you identify and you accommodate. You take someone who's crying and perhaps destined for a poor self-esteem and a sense of failure into great careers.
President Trump said a president of the United States should not have learning disabilities, and he actually criticized Governor Newsom of California for his disclosure that he was dyslexic. He referred to him as dumb, and he said it was a mental disorder. What does language like that do to younger generations?
Well, one, it's just, of course it's harmful. You should not insult people. We should really seek to encourage other people. Scripture speaks of a gift of encouragement. We should have a gift of encouragement, number one. Number two, if you look at some of the people who are dyslexic, who are really bright, they just learn to think differently. Charles Schwab describes himself as dyslexic. Charles Schwab's a pretty smart guy. And he thought differently. And so the idea is most of us learn to read, and we learn in a very linear fashion. That dyslexic learns to read differently. And learning to read differently opens their minds up to a different way of approaching things. Richard Branson self-describes as a dyslexic. Richard Branson's a pretty, Toby Cosgrove, former CEO, cardiovascular surgeon, former CEO of Cleveland Clinic. David Bowie, the famous lawyer. So if you learn to read differently, it is a strength sometimes, oftentimes. By the way, they also learn resilience. Because they've got to work harder, they actually end up doing better at the tasks that life comes before them. It may even be a qualification to be dyslexic.
I want to come back to some of these things with learning differences and health challenges, but let's come back to the price people pay these days for health care. When You were on the Senate floor recently. You were banging your hands down. You were yelling that the president needs to get engaged. Your party controls the White House. Your party controls the Capitol. Why haven't they done anything to deal with what you are describing as really a healthcare crisis in terms of affordability?
If you fully elaborate on what I said, Margaret, it's that we as Republicans and Democrats have to come together.
Yes.
You need 60 votes to get something done. But practically, you've got to be unified as a country.
Well, first you got to try.
You got to try.
The party hasn't put forward a
Well,
plan.
I'm not going to blame that on the president. Congress has a role, and the president needs to collaborate, but Congress has a role. And by the way, that's what I'm attempting to do. And so everything's not Donald Trump's fault. But I do say that if the president gets engaged, it gives a real push.
Mm-hmm.
And I would argue that our number one priority should be that family sitting around the kitchen table, looking at their bills and wondering how they're going to pay them. And one of those big items is health care. And if we can do something positive for that, we absolutely should. And by the way, the plan I propose takes principles that the president has embraced and makes them and kind of puts them into practice, if you will.
Giving cash to,
what's that?
Giving cash to individuals rather than directly to insurance companies. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes. If you take somebody, a family owner, getting insurance through their employer, and if you give them, for a family of 4, up to $2,000, money in their pocket, to pay that out of pocket, it actually benefits the family immediately. You can do that, and we can have that set up in a relatively short period of time. That would help that family.
You have any pledge from leadership to move that forward?
No, but partly you just got to make people aware of it, and partly the American people have to speak to our leadership.
And that's what November's about?
That's what November's about.
Okay. Let me ask you about your role on this powerful committee overseeing health policy. You were recently raising concern that the World Cup and some of these other mass gatherings happening in the United States run the risk of transmission at mass scale of some of these diseases right now. America may soon lose its measles elimination status because of the outbreaks happening on our soil. Of course, everyone's watching what's happening in the Congo with Ebola. Given the cuts to personnel, given the concern you have about what's happening inside these institutions, is American public health up to dealing with this level of risk?
Well, we don't know the complete effort that's being taken. Okay.
You don't.
Well, the Center for Disease Control, for example, has many things going on at any one moment that no one person knows unless you're directly involved in the agency. And so let me just say that. And I have no doubt that there's a commitment to making sure that there is not a widespread dissemination of disease at one of these mass events. I'll say that as well. We do see the consequences, though, of ignoring the benefits that things like vaccines brings for public health. And if you will, I think what you're going after is that this administration, parts of it, have tried to downplay the importance of immunization. The Secretary of War, Hegseth, recently did away with the flu mandate, and then there was a big outbreak of flu in one of their military outfits.
Yes.
If you ignore history, history doesn't necessarily repeat, but it has a rhythm. And we can look back in World War I, where the Spanish flu went through, decimating armies, but one of the reasons the Germans collapsed is because so many people died from Spanish flu that they had and didn't have manpower to fulfill, that their lines began to collapse. Combat readiness means preventing disease. And if you want to be combat ready, you don't want everybody out with the flu.
But he was following the Secretary of Health and Human Services push for medical freedom.
So if you see that, you can see we have a mutual obligation. When our founding fathers pledged their life, their fortune, and their sacred honor, there's a sense that we all have to, one, achieve those inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. There has to be also a spirit of sacrifice among everyone else. And so, if we're speaking about how to protect others, obviously, more people being immunized makes it less likely that someone else gets ill. There was a woman in Canada who spontaneously aborted her child because she was exposed to someone who had not been immunized. And she got the disease that the person was not vaccinated for, and her child died. Now, there's a consequence to not obeying the science of immunization. And one is children dying from measles, as has occurred, and thousands getting sick with many in the hospital. So I would argue, unfortunately, facts can be a tough, tough teacher. Protect yourself. Talk to your doctor. But society has a vested interest, as we all do, in we all being protected.
Well, we now have a longtime vaccine skeptic who is running HHS, who in private practice sued vaccine makers. How much harm has he done, or do you believe that he has restored trust in public health as you thought he might do?
Well, he has not restored trust in public health, and you can see the administration, if you believe the press accounts, are trying to limit his range of activity. Polling shows that the American people understand that vaccines are important. And for someone to be out there saying that they're not goes against their experience. And again, if you look at the measles outbreak, in which thousands of kids got measles, with the consequences of that, clearly the American people understand immunization is important. So I think you can see the administration responding to the American people's awareness that folks should be vaccinated.
But we looked at the vaccination rates, which have plummeted. There is not a single county or parish in Louisiana where kindergarten rates meet herd immunity protection levels for measles, meaning it could still be transmitted. Why do you think that is happening, particularly in red states like yours?
Well,
as Kennedy says, it's not his fault. This predated him, even though he had been working on the issue.
yeah. So leaving that aside, we can look back two things. One, people have not seen that illness. Or they've not seen illnesses. So if you've not been exposed to something, sometimes it's a little bit harder to imagine that it can occur to you. When I went to LSU, there was a gentleman, Tom Keister. He had polio, quadriplegic. I drove him to work every day for 3 years. I sat next to a man who was a quadriplegic because of a disease that could now be prevented by vaccines. When you have that experience, when as a physician, I had patients dying from diseases that had they been immunized, they would be alive, healthy, and whole, then you have a life experience which is different. But let's just be fair to our fellow Americans. If you've never seen a case of, if you've never had somebody who's had a child who's deeply mentally retarded because the mama was exposed to a disease while the child was in utero, you may not be able to relate to it. What we're going to find, though, is that people see these terrible events. When they see children die, a woman abort, perhaps a child unfortunately born mentally retarded, then they will have greater understanding. Facts can be a tough teacher, but they do teach.
Do you see Secretary Kennedy learning from those facts? Is he open to those facts?
He and I have had multiple conversations, text messages going back and forth and emails. And he seems pretty dug in on his positions. And whatever you bring to the table, for some reason, is not adequate. So I don't see him changing his mind.
Do you think he's going to still be here after you leave in January?
He serves at the president's pleasure. And so I can't answer that.
Well, I know that you have this oversight role. You've taken it seriously. You've called forward some of these former CDC officials to share with you what's happening inside public health. Secretary Kennedy went on television and made false claims about the MMR vaccine, even claiming there were fetal parts in it. I mean, you had CDC officials saying the secretary is out there in the middle of a measles epidemic telling people false information. Why isn't that disqualifying for the job?
Well, first, he's already in the job. And so, again, he serves at the president's pleasure.
And you think the president is now aware that this is a problem?
The polling, just what I read in the paper, the White House has seen polling that shows the American people rightly understand that immunization is important. And they see these measles outbreaks, and they understand that that the American people, whoa, we're not getting immunized, and now we have children dying from measles. We have people in the hospital because of measles. We have schools that can't open because of measles. And so the administration clearly has gotten off the anti-vaccine message into something more positive. By the way, let's give the secretary credit. He is very much into ultra-processed foods. If that's where he stayed, our country would be really much better off. But the concept that immunizations somehow are bad has been clearly disproven by life experience. Because what's happening is people are getting sick, in some cases dying. And the administration clearly has moved away from that.
Well, there's no Senate-confirmed Surgeon General, no Senate-confirmed CDC Director. There hasn't been for 9 months now. No Senate-confirmed FDA Chief. 13 of the 27 NIH centers are currently run by acting directors. Is this a problem? Is this something you want to move through by the time you leave?
Clearly, it is a problem, if you will, that would reflect a wider problem at HHS. That just goes without saying. Lack of stability is a problem. But there are people nominated for some of these positions. We will process them in this committee, the committee I'm chair of, the Help Committee. We're in the Help Committee room. As soon as we get their paperwork. That's something we just have to have. There's a process you go through. But I've met with the nominee for the Surgeon General, and I met with the nominee for CDC Director, and am very favorably impressed. And so I imagine they will, I can't speak for everybody, but I imagine they will be approved. And so progress is being made. But you're right, to be this far into an administration with that much turnover is not a good thing. And going back, our goal to be, my goal, our goal to be, should be to serve the American people. And you better serve them in terms of public health with stability and with an acknowledgement of that which is actually true, and in this case, immunizations work.
Well, I mean, the current CDC Autism and Vaccines page has a heading that says vaccines do not cause autism, very clearly. But there's an asterisk next to it. And it says it's up there due to an agreement with you, the chair of the committee. You go to lower down on the page and there are some confusing things said there, including that there's no scientific foundation to rule out a linkage. Do you think there will be strong oversight after January? Do statements like that disappear?
I cannot tell you that it's going to disappear. Excuse me. I can tell you that that broken agreement that I had with the secretary, that was not supposed to happen. So once you lose trust in somebody, you're not quite sure what to trust going forward. In fact, you don't trust anything. It should go away because the evidence is that that is not the case. That is a prejudice being brought. And by the way, if you build public health upon a foundation of lies, then you're going to have the absence of adequate public health. You need to build everything in life on truth. I go back to being a doctor. You got to search for the truth and use the truth for your solutions. That sounds kind of, oh my gosh. No, that's the only way you make the correct diagnosis and the correct. This is not truth. And there'll be a consequence of it. And that consequence, unfortunately, will be borne by those who actually are influenced by it. I will say, except for news anchors, very few people read the CDC website. And so I'm not sure how much influence that has, how much negative influence that has.
But the message is heard. I mean, from the President of the United States' own social media account.
Oh, I get that.
He
I totally
links
get that.
the MMR vaccine
I totally get
and
that.
Tylenol to autism.
I totally get that. And that's
Isn't
wrong.
there damage that's done?
Well, I don't, again, people have sensory overload, so I'm not sure how much that does, but that's false. It is wrong. And if you build a position based upon lies, upon falsehoods, that position cannot stand. I am a doctor searching for truth, both for the diagnosis of the problem and how do you cure it. In this case, autism is, oh my gosh, doesn't our heart go out for those parents who have autism? But putting them on a guilt trip because they gave their child a Tylenol or they took Tylenol when they were pregnant is not the answer. You don't make that mom guilty. What you do is you invest those resources into finding the true answer. Actually help the child. Don't just fearmonger.
Can they trust anything that comes out from the administration on autism?
At this point, well, anything. Anything's a pretty broad term. There's a lot of people at the NIH. If you include that as part of the administration, then you are actually kind of encompassing more in terms, and there's a lot of people in the administration who are scientists, who are doctors, who have studied this, who understand kind of how complex the issue is and how ridiculous that is. So I wouldn't, anything's a pretty broad term.
You said that Secretary Kennedy broke promises to you.
It's pretty clear.
Do you think he just made those promises to win your vote, that it was just political expediency?
Easy to surmise.
You hate the question of whether you regret your vote. But can you explain why you said yes?
Of course, and I have before. Bobby Kennedy was going to have the ear of the president. the president seems to be fascinated with the Kennedys. So either he was going to be in a position where there were guardrails, and I did have commitments made as to kind of guardrails, or he was going to be appointed White House health czar, in which case you'd have the president's ear without the guardrails. Now, I had to make a decision. He's going to have the president's ear. Is it going to be with some sort of guardrails where there'd be a commitment to meet on a quarterly basis, in which there could be regular communication, in which there would be kind of an agreement that I would have, obviously as a chair, I have some role in terms of the people who assist him, or would he be an unappointed, a non-Senate confirmed healthcare zone? That's kind of my choice. And I chose, you can criticize it, but I chose to have the one with the guardrails.
You think you reined him in?
The commitment.
It would have been worse?
I don't, well, that is something that you cannot know. We can't go back in time and say, White House czar. But we do know the president is very influenced by Bobby Kennedy. And so if that's the case, is it better, at least at the outset when these decisions are being made, that there's an open line of communication, a commitment to appear on a quarterly basis, with a commitment to say that to preserve this and to preserve that? What was better? At the time, I made the decision it was better to have the guardrails. You can criticize that, but I think, again, as I'm searching for kind of the right diagnosis and the right cure, you can criticize me, but I'm not sure it's quite as kind of black and white as people like to say.
But there have been changes, as you said, that violate many of the promises made to you, including the advisory role, that panel, federal advisory panel on vaccines. I mean, you said there are people on there who don't know anything about epidemiology. Does the damage that you think may have been done here outlast all of us?
No.
I mean, is the damage to the institution such?
No. I mean, our government has a wonderful ability. Our people, the United States is an incredible country. And our institutions have the ability to be rejuvenated in a way that's just really positive. Again, I am so bullish on the United States of America and the scientists that are underpinning our efforts to help our American people to have life, liberty, and the ability to pursue happiness. They're going to bring their knowledge in a better form of communication with the American people in order they can achieve that. And I am so confident of that.
So if Dems flip the House, if Democrats win the House, do you think RFK will be impeached?
You're asking, I don't know that. I mean, I don't know what's in the mind of a Democrat.
You think there's evidence enough to move on that, though?
I don't know what the impeachable offense would be. I just
You
don't know
don't?
what it is. Yeah, I mean, I just don't know what it is.
But you don't think he should be in that job?
At this point, the commitments that were made to me have been violated. When commitments are made, trust is destroyed, it's difficult to have effectiveness. By the way, I once read, trust is the coin of the realm. If you lose trust, you lose everything here. And by the way, the ability to work with others is essential for our government to function. Essential. And I go back to pledging your life, your fortune, your sacred honor. There was a commitment of trust there by our founding fathers in order to make sure that folks had access to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, when I asked the president to work with me and Democrats and Republicans to work together in order to come up with something which is beneficial to that family sitting around the kitchen table, there's mutual trust required. It's required. And we have to capitalize, have to hope for that to achieve that purpose. If someone breaks that trust, then you kind of excuse yourself from the ability to work with others.
The head of the Political Action Group, Make America Healthy Again, or MAHA, says they poured hundreds of thousands of dollars into your primary race. This is a reliably red state, and they're spending serious money, not to flip to a Democrat, but just a different Republican. They took a real focus here on you. Do you think it made a discernible difference?
The chief issue, let me talk about my race for a second.
Yeah.
Let me first quote a famous philosopher, James Bond, in Quantum Solace. And he says, you can be judged by the strength of your enemies. To beat me, I had a governor, a state legislature, a president, cabinet officials, and members of Congress all coming at me. And they obviously succeeded. But we used to have an open primary in which 1.2 million people could vote for or against me, and they closed it to 400,000. trying to distill it down to those who are least likely to vote for me. And among those people, the critical issue is, who did the president endorse? He endorsed somebody different. And so
he openly encouraged a primary challenger.
Absolutely. And and we know why. I voted to uphold the Constitution. The president was offended by that. But that said, it took all that effort in order to beat me. So in one way, I'm complimented. Maha, they just supported my state's economy. Because the real issue is, who did the president endorse? We can say that in retrospect. I was hoping that my record could convince even those folks who were kind of distilled down to those least likely to vote for me that they could. I was wrong. But I will note, they had to close that primary because if it had been open, which anyone could vote, then they thought I would win. But we'll never know.
The advocacy group Maha Action touted the win as the Maha movement's taking its first scalp by defeating you.
Yeah, that's a press release they're going to put out to try and raise money. It was a president's endorsement, period, end of story.
You don't think all that money and the accusation of you defending Big Pharma that they made matters? This isn't a formidable political force in the future?
I don't see that. I see them as, I just don't. The issue there was, who did the president endorse? And he solicited, and I'm not even sure his endorsed candidate's going to win. It looks like the person he didn't endorse may beat her, Dr. John Fleming. So
you think so? You think
the polls I read,
Congresswoman Lutlow's going to lose?
I can't say that, but the polls are neck and neck. I'll just say that. So point being, but really it came down to the president being offended that I voted to support the Constitution in his trial. And so that was it. Let's just acknowledge it. And then you combine that with the closed partisan primary. So, but I don't complain about it. I don't go around saying the election was stolen. That's not the thing to do. The thing to do is, these are the rules, I play by them, let's move on.
So even though in your state the vaccine hesitancy is measurably there, even though some of these health issues have come up during the campaign, you do not think that was a factor?
I don't.
Or it just wasn't the deciding one?
Not at all. By the way, one thing that I have going for me is that I am a physician. And people know that physicians are trying to find the truth of a situation. And in that truth, and by the way, I demonstrate that. And I will explain my reasoning to get to a decision. There are Democrats who are changing to become Republicans or no party in order to vote for me. I'm incredibly honored by that. Incredibly honored. Because they saw, I may disagree with them on this or that, but I absolutely agree with him on the fact that he is trying to find out what the problems are in our society and trying to find the true way to address it. And so I'm honored that people did that. Obviously it wasn't enough, but I'll go back. They had to close the primary in order to beat me.
So do you think that you have a career in public health after this?
I don't know quite what I'm going to do. But it's a big world out there. Remember the last episode of Calvin and Hobbes? And,
I don't.
Yeah, you know. Oh my gosh, you got to look it up. But anyway, in Calvin and Hobbes, I think Calvin and Hobbes are talking to each other. And what are you going to do next? And he goes, as in the middle frame says, I'm not quite sure, but I do know this. And the last frame was just a blank whiteboard. The fact is that you can write that out. So my future and my wife, we will figure that out. I'll support her as she works for dyslexia. I'll continue to try, if you will, to do my version of pledging life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. My life, my fortune, and my sacred honor for others and myself to achieve life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, because that gives me joy. That actually gives me joy. So I will figure out how that is, but it's going to be an exciting next chapter.
So what do you think your single biggest accomplishment in Congress has been?
My biggest single accomplishment is to show that if you take on a difficult problem and you're willing to really stick to it, you can find an answer. And we say our problems are so big, but there's things, my Social Security proposal we've been working on for 6 or 8 years.
Yeah.
And so,
but those serious things aren't getting done here.
Well, it takes a while both to prepare the American people for how you're going to solve it, but also to bring people along with you. And so folks want to snap their finger like 3-minute rice and 3 minutes later have their rice. It takes time to come up with the solutions, to listen to the stakeholders, to go out and talk to people and to find out the answer. Now, my strength, if you will, is to show you can solve big issues. You just got to work at it. And one thing I do is I work. I work really hard. And so, No Surprises Act, which prevents surprise medical billings for the American family, began to bring in price transparency. I'm told it prevents a million surprise medical bills per month. That's my bill. And we started working on it 2 years in advance. And I said to my team, this isn't quite the issue, but it's going to be the issue. I got Democrats and Republicans. Maggie Hassan was my chief Democrat. We worked together on a bipartisan basis, talking to stakeholders, and then at the end, we're able to bring it together. It was hard, but it was big. And that is something that's going to help that family sitting at the kitchen table, helping them now. You can solve big problems. You just got to look for the truth in terms of the diagnosis and the cure, and you got to work hard.
Well, and you need leaders.
You need leaders. And you need a leader who's willing to pledge life, liberty, and the fortune and sacred honor. And that's what I think we should all be about if you're going to be an elected leader.
Who is the best Republican to lead the country right now in 2028? I mean, you've been reflecting a lot. I've seen you say we need leaders who are steady, not erratic, thoughtful, not impulsive, lower the temperature rather than inflame division. It's clear who you're talking about.
So I can't tell you who's going to be the best person in 2028 because part of that choice will be the refining process of the electoral process. We cannot get ahead of the American voter. You can trust that voter. And that voter sooner or later is going to, they'll make a mistake every now and then. I think they made a mistake in my race. But that said, over the long haul, the American voter, you can trust their wisdom. And I think that process of who's going to lead us in 2028 will be decided by voters, and that's the right thing.
Would you see anyone emerging as embodying the things that you say leaders should?
There's the people we speak of, but it should be something which is able to be demonstrated to the American people. You can be the perfect person in the world, but unless you can communicate it to the American people and get the reassure them that, my gosh, you stand up there. You're the guy looking for truth. You're the guy who is trying to bring solutions. You're the guy who's going to work hard. You're the guy pledging your life, your fortune, your sacred honor. That's the person who should be our next president. And whoever can communicate that to the American people should be our next president.
Spent a lot of time with the vice president last night.
I did spend a lot of time with the vice president, and obviously he's one of the names being touted, and he will have the chance to present his case to the American people.
I know we're out of time. I wanted to quickly ask you, though. Secretary Rubio recently said that the State Department needs to take back control of some of the vaccines that are distributed overseas, where Secretary Kennedy had been exerting some influence. Do you think some of this is factored in to the Ebola outbreak or the lack of preparedness overseas, the fact that this vaccine skepticism has even touched programs within the State Department?
Well, there's not really first, you got a lot in there. First, I think I I strongly objected to what Bobby did with immunizations overseas. That is a form of soft power. We are in a global geopolitical competition with China. One thing that's helped us tremendously in sub-Saharan Africa is the PEPFAR program and immunization programs in which people there thank the United States and are predisposed to work with us. That is soft power. It is better than sending troops. It's cheaper than sending troops. It's a humane thing to do, and by the way, it's in the U.S. interest. Bobby was opposed to it because he had some foolish notion about the dangers of vaccines, but instead we see people dying of disease. Next, there's not a vaccine for Ebola, but it's fair to say that the infrastructure we had helped create in Africa had been damaged by the changes in USAID, for example. And that probably made us less capable of responding. The United States is the indispensable nation. And we can argue that it is in our self-interest to take care of our people. There are missionaries in Africa, physicians, for example, with their families who are exposed to Ebola at risk of getting sick. And so I'm a guy who says, let's prevent disease. It's in our self-interest to project our power in a positive way as opposed to sending troops. It's cheaper, it's also humane, it's consistent with our values. That's who I am. I'm a physician. Bobby felt like, I don't know, vaccines were dangerous, and so he wasn't going to do it. Rubio taking it back, I think, shows that there's a recognition that soft power is important. And this competition with China, the ability to go to a head of state in Africa and say, listen, we have helped you so much. We have a strong relationship. Let's work together, and this is how we can be effective. And I'm glad that they recognize that.
Dr. Cassidy, Senator, thank you for your time.
Thank you.